Hello, puppies and kittens. Welcome to another episode of Blasphemers Bible. And I got to say that I am proud of the self-assembled team that we have here. I want to open today with a comment that somebody wrote to me just this morning, and I think that this really needs to be bounced off the panel. Somebody was arguing with me, and as they always do, every minute of every day in social media, where somebody told me that the Genesis account is the original, and any pagan similarities are incidental or distorted copies of the original. And the same goes for the Gilgamesh story with its completely unseaworthy cube shaped ark, just a distorted copy of Genesis. So, the tales of the epics and all of that from 2200 BCE are all newer copies of
Mm.
the Genesis account written in the 5th century BCE.
Well, in their mind,
yeah.
it's it would be the first one written, but it'd be far, far older. But the at least in their weird chronology. But the biggest issue with that model is that when it comes to who was in control of like the whole fucking land for the time, at the time, it wasn't Israel. It was either we got Mesopotamia, Babylon, Sumer, right? We have then you have the Babylonians, the Assyrians, like those guys are the ones in control. Their texts will be more widely known across their world. It is far less likely that a global superpower would take the stories of one small community in relation to them than that one small community taking a greater story from a global superpower.
My problem with it is
the question is it
the types of similarities and differences, where we have the trivial details that all match, but the big important stuff is completely different.
Like which god they're getting the favor
Exactly.
of, or getting slaughtered by, or pissing off. This is one of the things that in retrospect I so viscerally hate about my creationist education, because a lot of parents lie to themselves that they're just keeping their children from understanding evolution, which will make them think they're not animals, which will mean blah blah moral blah blah. You've all heard the arguments, we've all have. But in order to fit into a creationist narrative, you not only have to ignore paleontology, geology, the entire world of astrophysics and everything associated with it, but you also have to ignore like the majority of written history from a timeline standpoint, not perhaps from a library standpoint, but from the standpoint of the time of human history for which we have both artifacts and written records. I mean, I've made the joke, and it is true, that we have a 28,000-year-old dildo. If you want to talk about human artifacts, like that is many, many times older than the universe, apparently. But putting which the hardcore ones will, a 6,000-year time limit on our existence doesn't allow for history as it occurred. We're talking about the Indus Valley. We're talking about Sumer. You have to compress all these things and ignore all of these things. And things like the Babylonian tablets, the not Babylonian, sorry, Neo-Babylon, the cuneiform tablets, the clay tablets with all these both histories and, records of, buying and selling, but also literature and things on them. We have the originals, and not only that, but we have astrological events that can provide absolutely foolproof 100% accuracy in dating. There is no way that this conjunction of the spheres was off by like 500 years. No, some of these things happen like thousands of years apart. It's just not possible. So you have to ignore all of that reality to make this claim. And the way they do that is by, denying all kinds of realities, but you have to deny the times we actually know when Gilgamesh was written, or at least, the versions we have access to.
Look at the antiquity
And the
of the
Bible.
Sumerian king list. Just
Absolutely.
that alone.
Absolutely.
But there's no way to deny the antiquity of that document.
Don't underestimate deliberate ignorance. There is no
Okay.
honest way to deny, but it is absolutely possible to deny.
Okay.
Yeah, for sure. Like, maybe 300 years ago or 200 years ago, they would teach this stuff in university, like the Bible is the oldest stuff. But over the last 100 years or less, the archaeological discoveries that have uncovered many of these tablets have completely debunked that concept. So, like, you've got like the Enuma Elish, that's like dated 1300 BC, and that's
yeah.
like, original, like it's all like in the tablet and it's in stone. The oldest thing that there is in Hebrew, for example, is the Kerbet Kifaya inscription. You'll have to forgive my mispronunciation probably, but that's like dated to like at the oldest, it's the 11th century BC. So by a few hundred years, the archaeological evidence demonstrates that these Babylonian myths definitely predated anything that's like Genesis. This is a great resource for anyone wanting to look into in greater depth. I mean, you can see how hefty it is.
Yeah.
It even shows you drawings of the tablets so that you can examine everything for yourself.
What's really funny is I actually have that book up in another tab because I'm using it for a video.
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
It's a great resource.
Yeah.
Arn, I hate to interrupt. Arn, I hate to interrupt, but you've lost most of the chat because everyone wants to know who Not Tomer is and why is Tomer not here because it's his show.
No, that's definitely not Tomer. So we need to figure out where Tomer is. We've been very worried about him. All morning, actually.
I think Tomer has gone dark. Tomer has gone dark.
Yes, let not Tomer to explain what he's doing and why we're all drinking this morning.
Oh, yeah, yes. So get off me. Okay, so
that was Tomer's secret girlfriend. He's like, get off me, you harlot.
Good to know. Good to know the fantasies of Lawrence. So, today and tomorrow is Purim, and because it is customary to, I know Isaac in your land it's not, but here it is almost, and it is customary to put some costumes. It's kind of like a Jewish Halloween, but not really. So that's my costume, quote unquote. And there is also
you are clothed in darkness.
Exactly.
I love it.
One of the most interesting things about the Book of Esther is that God's name is not mentioned even once. And like the rabbinical understanding of that is it's supposed to be the name Esther also kind of means hiddenness. And it's like the idea of like God works in mysterious ways. Like it doesn't say anywhere in the story that there's a miracle or anything, but you're supposed to see it for like without being explicit. I think that's the idea that they teach of that story.
It was very common at the time, and that's kind of one of the motifs that places it in league with Daniel and with the Joseph story. It's that God is barely talked about ever. He's a very background character, if anything, and it's interpreted to be like, okay, so he is behind all this stuff, but he's never like explicitly like doing a whole bunch of things. So it kind of like places it in this section of court tale. So it's like very much like it's very secular in comparison.
I love that the ones that don't include God's name at all are much better written stories. God is a terrible writer when he involves himself. He's much better as like the drapes.
I don't know. Jonah's pretty fun.
Well, yeah, but then it just like drops off at the end. He's just sitting there crying under a withered vine.
That's the best part.
He sounds like a conservative who got really upset the M&Ms aren't sexy anymore. But there's one little thing. I swear I will not rant too much on this, but I ran away to get a little book from William Jennings Bryant. Again, part of the evangelical movement in the beginning of the last century. He wrote,
for those unaware, let me just jump in for a moment. This is the guy who famously said that if the Bible said that Jonah swallowed the whale, I would believe it.
Yes. Yeah. And he wrote this book because I managed to scalp a lot of a former pastor's library when he was moving too far to take it. And I managed to scalp this little book, a collection of his most infamous, I would say, essays from like a Sunday school circular back when they did that. Think like Mark Twain days. And he talks about how basically how important it was to repel criticism, not just to argue against it, but to just not listen to it, because the authority of the Bible is paramount. And these, if you look at the table of contents, it's absolutely fundamental to him to defend, regardless of any actual facts involved. The inspiration of the Bible, the deity of Christ, the virgin birth, the blood atonement, the bodily resurrection of Jesus, the miracles of our Lord, and the origin of man, meaning the Adam and Eve, and it's all pain and suffering is our fault because someone ate a fruit. This is like, honestly, this is the playbook they started with, and it's just denial. It has nothing to do with facts, and that's an important thing to keep in mind.
You mentioned a moment ago Mark Twain times. One of Mark Twain's characters described faith as being believing what you know ain't so.
Yes, well, Mark Twain was an atheist, so we know why. But it's true. It's true. It's the idea is simply you lock it into your mind and you resist anything that contradicts it, no matter where it comes from, no matter what it says. That the content of the opposition doesn't matter. It's opposition, blank slate, reject.
Yeah, I got a comment I got to read. So Sailman offers $4.99 and says, Aaron, what was that there can be only one recipe that you talked about a while ago? There's a local a beer garden in the town that I live that has that on their menu, and they make the hottest chicken wings I've ever had in this country. The only wings I've ever had that were hotter were made with laboratory extracted pure capsaicin. But these people are actually using peppers, so they're not cheating.
Yeah, I always felt like the pure capsaicin people were cheating.
Yeah. All right.
Oh, and I should also add, before we start with Joshua, there is a commandment in the Talmud, specifically Megillah 7b, that, quote, a person is obligated to become intoxicated with wine on Purim until he is so intoxicated that he does not know how to distinguish between cursed is Haman and blessed is Mordecai. So, with the spirit of Purim, I don't have wine, I do have beer. This is called Malka, literally queen. What?
I'm just saying, I'm frustrated because I'm already there. I don't know what the difference is between those two things.
Good. When we get to Esther, you
will meet Esther.
And it's a pale ale, so vomit emojis.
Yep. And I'm drinking another local imperial stout.
The thing that is stopping me from drinking is two things. I haven't had breakfast and I work later. So like, I don't know. I want to, but I also probably shouldn't. It'd be a bad idea.
Oh, you're just not in the holiday spirit.
I've got a little bit of Buchanan's in my coffee, so that's like Scotch, Irish.
Okay.
Kind of stuff.
I threw a little booze in my coffee, but if I leave later and it's not to get a book, it's probably to top up.
All right. So who is reading today, Mark?
I can.
I like to. Oh, Kip Davis chimes in. Hello, Kip, and says, titled a section of my chapter about Genesis 2 creation myth, splitting the atom.
That's so good. That is so good. Oh my God. I hope Kip goes into, I mean, it sounds like he is from the title of that chapter, but like the whole hermaphroditic atom myth, like I really go into that.
The one where you cross it with the symposium?
Oh yeah, that one too. Yeah, but there's so many like apocryphal works that like start with this assumption of like there being an Adam that is, well, he's both Adam and Eve in one. He's like connected in some way. In some artwork, he's literally like, it's like a what's it called, like a Siamese twin or whatever they're called, conjoined twins. I don't know what the
Lawrence, let's have you and me and Kip on a hangout to talk about that.
Okay, yeah, there's so I would have to like go back and like pull up all the texts, but yeah, absolutely, because that is such a cool mythos. I love it. So,
I want to see these illustrations because that sounds like some crazy, like, not frontline medieval shit, but yeah.
Yeah, I remember one specifically. I'll have to find it, but yeah.
Okay, but I do want to do that. Okay, all right. So who's yeah, Mark, go ahead.
Sure. Do you want me to read the whole thing or?
Tomer? Did we lose Tomer?
Yeah, we lost Tomer.
He clothed himself in drunkenness.
Yes.
I'm guessing someone probably just kicked the router. It's
all
tradition.
Right, so, yeah, tradition. Okay, go ahead. Go ahead.
It's crawling under the table.
Tomer's blinking back in. Tomer, how far should Mark read?
Finish the chapter. And I apologize. I'm having internet issues. I had internet issues all week, so I hope.
The more you drink, the more issues you'll have.
Oh yeah, I forgot. There we go.
All right. Well, today I'll be reading from the NET Bible NET, New English Translation, which I think it's a tradition of the seminary I graduated from. So there's some interesting translation, weird kind of things that occur. So, but I think it's more so in chapter 24. But here we go, chapter 23. A long time passed after the Lord made Israel secure from all their enemies, and Joshua was very old. So Joshua summoned all Israel, including the elders, rulers, judges, and leaders, and told them, I'm very old. You saw everything the Lord your God did to all these nations on your behalf. For the Lord your God fights for you. See, I have parceled out your tribes, these remaining nations, from the Jordan to the Mediterranean Sea, in the west, including all the nations I defeated. The Lord your God will drive them out from before you and remove them, so you can occupy their land as the Lord your God promised you. Be very strong. Carefully obey all that is written in the law scroll of Moses, so you won't swerve from it to the right or to the left, or associate with these nations that remain near you. You must not invoke or make solemn declarations by the names of their gods. You must not worship or bow down to them, but you must be loyal to the Lord your God as you've been to this very day. The Lord drove out from before you great and mighty nations. No one has been able to resist you to this very day. One of you makes 1,000 run away, for the Lord your God fights for you as he promised you he would. Watch yourselves carefully. Love the Lord your God, but if you ever turn away and make alliances with these nations that remain near you, and intermarry with them and establish friendly relations with them, know for certain that the Lord our God will no longer drive out these nations from before you. They will trap and snare you. There will be a whip that tears your sides and thorns that blind your eyes until you disappear from this good land Yahweh your God gave you. Look, today I am about to die. You know with all your heart and being that not even one of all the faithful promises the Lord your God made to you is left unfulfilled. Everyone was realized, not one promise is unfulfilled. But in the same way, every faithful promise the Lord your God made to you has been realized. It is just as certain, if you disobey, that the Lord will bring on you every judgment until he destroys you from this good land which the Lord your God gave you. If you violate the covenantal laws, the Lord your God, which he commanded you to keep and follow and worship and bow down to other gods, the Lord your God will be very angry with you, and you will disappear quickly from the good land which he gave to you. And that's the end of chapter 23.
I had this rant. I did it last time. You know, they're not one of the promises.
Okay, I'm still a little confused on what she's talking about, but
you know, the not one of the promises. They're all fulfilled. God gave you everything, blah blah blah. And I'm like, the fuck?
So something I really noticed a lot about this one, as opposed to earlier chapters, it's like, okay, so at the beginning of this, right? It talks about how old Joshua was. So
how old was he?
He was this old. So there was I forget the chapter, but right before we get into like the whole separating the land and stuff.
13, I think.
Was it 13? Okay.
Yes.
Yeah.
13:1.
Yeah. So yeah, Joshua was old and advanced in years. So there are a couple ways that one could go with this, right? So from the context of the story, from this little narrative we get, like, listen, all these people in the story already, these people have been driven out, right? But it also talks about people that remain, even though beforehand we got that everyone was kicked out, right? So the issue becomes like, at what point was something like this added to the text? Was it an original layer, maybe kind of matching it up with the stuff from Joshua 13, or is this in exilic edition, which is very much saying like, okay, here is the reason why there are still people like here, or is it even perhaps post-exilic? The earliest this could be would be exilic, but it also possible it could have hints of post-exilic stuff, right? Because there are still people in the land, but the Israelites are also given this this whole thing about like, listen, if you don't mingle with their gods and whatnot, you'll be okay. So it might be later on there, but the theme of there being this remnant of people still in the land. In fact, the phrase is explicitly used a few times, right? So like in verse 4, it says, I think it's verse 4. I have allotted to you as an inheritance for your tribes those nations that remain. And then verse 12 as well, these nations left here among you. So stuff like that is not something that we've seen in the Deuteronomistic author so far, like that phrase specifically.
Yeah, it does make some sense in the sense of the narrative, where if we were taking this, como escrita as written, Joshua has like started the invasion. They've won so much land. They've divvied up by lots what's going to happen. And then his successors will have to continue, pushing out these land. And then once it's conquered, it'll be allocated as determined. But it definitely does have that post-exilic racist insinuation and connotation of, the reason we got screwed is because we married those dirty heathen locals. And, if we do that again, gonna lose it again. So
it's very Ezra and Nehemiah philosophy on that one.
Yeah, just so racist. And they're the ones who love the stories of, slamming couples mid-coitus with spears and calling it righteousness.
Okay.
I also thought that it was a little sad just to kind of hear Joshua, say that a couple of times. I'm old, kind of like I'm tired, and I'm just thinking like this is beyond the text now, but it's kind of like, being a leader, a man of God, right? This is no different. This is a human being, just like anyone else. Like, what's the big deal?
Okay, I'll start my commentary. Okay. So on verse 1.
Should we read the comments?
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I've got Matt White says, Isaac and Tomer, could you go into the difference between Torah, Talmud, and Midrash? Cheers and happy Atheist Day.
Is it Atheist Day? Oh, never mind.
My connection isn't very good, so maybe right now I'll quickly. Yeah, I mean the thing is he missed out a couple of things. Like the Torah in strictly only refers to the first 5 books of Moses. It's not like it's not a direct translation of Bible. But if you were to include what we call the writings and the prophets, take all of those together, we could call it Tanakh, which is like an acronym for the names. And that you could call the Hebrew Bible or the Old Testament, although the Old Testament kind of implies that
the Old
it's
Testament is
the
different.
Christian version of it. It's different order and
It's
stuff
different.
like that. So
It's
order.
different.
It's not that.
Yeah.
It's not that big of a deal.
It
These phrases are used
depends.
synonymously in
It
scholarship.
depends on who you ask.
It's not identical.
Yeah, they're
but
pretty.
it's
Yeah,
very
they're pretty
close.
synonymous.
Yeah, I'm a little confused on this too. When I mentioned
So Old
that
Testament kind of implies you're talking about the Christian version of the.
It
For
is
example,
from
for
a
Joe,
Christian perspective, yeah, but
For-
it's
when
for
I try
Joe
to
Biden,
explain,
sorry.
when I try to explain to Christians that the Hebrew Bible is not a Christian book, that they're not talking about Jesus, right, and among other things. And when I talk about what is the context of what these Jewish authors believe, I would refer to concordant comments in the Talmud, right? But then the Christians get upset and say, well, the Talmud was written later. I'm like, yeah, but it was written by the same people. It's the same culture commenting on the same thing. So this gives you a different different context for the same concept that they're talking about from the same culture.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I mean, more or less, but I think the big issue, right? Because the Talmud would have been written afterwards, like even after the New Testament. But the fact is that
codified.
context,
It would have been older. Parts of it are older than in the New Testament.
Yeah,
it's just the actual writing
That's
down.
the other
of it
thing.
would have
If we can just jump in before Lawrence goes on, when we talk about the Talmud and the Midrash, there's not a date we can give to either of these works, right? Yeah,
they span over a wide period of time. So yeah, the Midrash, the philosophy behind it is like, okay, so Moses gave us all this stuff. He wrote down all this stuff, and it's great and whatnot. But like, what's the stuff that he didn't tell us? So the Midrash is thought to be like the oral tradition of the stuff that wasn't like explicitly laid out in these texts.
Mm-hmm.
And then the Talmud is essentially the commentary on those things, on the Torah and
the Talmud is a commentary on the Mishnah, and most of the Talmud, I think 90% of it is just legal stuff. Only 10% of it is like Midrash, I would say. And there are other Midrash literature out there that are separate from the Talmud. You have all the Rabbah stuff. You have
but the Talmud is a combination of the Talmud is technically the Mishnah and the Gemara, and the Mishnah is like Hebrew. It's older. It's also was oral but written down, and then the Gemara is the Aramaic commentary on the Mishnah, and that's the bit that goes into like crazy conversation and stuff. The Mishnahs are a bit more succinct and focused on the law, and then the Gemara just goes on these crazy tangents.
I will say, I wanted to say that Joe Biden thinks that I saw a tweet of him that Joe Biden thinks that the Hebrew Bible is not the Old Testament. So.
Yeah, and well, good for Joel. They are used synonymously in scholarship. So because the thing is, by their nature, they're vague. They're kind of vague, right? Because what canon exactly are we talking about is still going to change from community to community. So, but like the idea of like, well, the older books, right? The Jewish ones. So the idea behind like Aaron, you were saying like, okay, so this is written by the same people, but the thing is, this is hundreds of years later. So when we talk about it, like these commentaries were written in their own context as well. So while they have an interpretation, we have to view it through the lens of people that are still living later. So even though it's still a Jewish one, it is still, as all interpretations, modified by the lens that they are viewing it through. So let's say
are you saying that just because they're American doesn't mean that that Thomas Jefferson necessarily agrees with Tucker Carlson?
Yeah, that works. So
yeah. I mean, rabbinic Judaism would have like developed, after the temple was destroyed, and also, and as Christianity was rising as well, so it would have developed like with some
there would be some reactionary elements to that, certainly.
Yeah.
I mean, how much later is William Jennings Bryant? It's all the interpretations are later, but there's also just there's two things there that you need to remember. A lot of Christians, when they quote, they are doing an appeal to authority. So they will often think that you're doing the same thing. If I quote Christopher Hitchens because I think he said something really, really fucking well, because he did, and he had a good point, they think I'm frequently, not always, but frequently think I'm appealing to him as an authority, which is just silly. Again,
especially considering who we're talking about.
Yeah, well, exactly. And they'll say, why do you quote the Talmud? Come on, it's not the Bible. Like, it's not the Bible. What are you even doing? What are you doing? Why are you quoting that? It's like, so you're not actually interested in understanding any of the history of this religion. You're just interested in co-opting the bits you can use and ignoring the rest, but denying that you're doing that. Great.
Christian apologetics.
Yeah, basically.
So kind of going to the point of like, yes, it was definitely like shaped at or with the opponents, I guess, in mind in many cases.
Hold on, I got to read a couple of comments from somebody who ought to be on the panel today.
Yeah, Kip, hop in here. You get a link.
Kip Davis says, same people and same culture need to be taken with an amount of salt, a great amount of salt. Early Judaism was not Rabbinic Judaism, and early Judaism was not Israelite Judaism. Thank you, but I would love to hear explanations of that. And then Kip Davis says again, Mishnah is 3rd century, Talmudim are 5th and 6th century. And Kip Davis adds a third comment, which would be easier if you were just on camera. Much of the rabbinic literature has been irrevocably shaped by the events of the Jewish wars and by interactions with Christians.
Yeah,
seriously, I sound like I'm jabbing Kip. It's a sincere invitation. But yes, thank you.
Yeah, definitely rabbinical literature in general. But the Talmud itself, I don't think has that much Christian influence because it was mostly written in like Babylonia and some bits in Israel, but so it wouldn't have had as much Christian influence.
It still has a good amount because here's kind of the later bits. Yeah. What I want to point out is someone actually sent this to me because it was on the wish list. So this is a commentary on this is volume 1. This is a commentary on the New Testament from Talmud and Midrash. And look at this gigantic fucking thing.
Wow.
It is. And this, by the way, just so you know, this is just on Matthew. This is just on Matthew.
I find that very interesting.
And how short is Matthew? Everybody remember?
In comparison to this. So this takes up like a lot of like it is like a lot of Talmudic stuff, right? And it's basically all just like compiled on like here's like a certain philosophy in Matthew, here's like a certain underlying idea, and here's what the Jews thought of that idea at the time.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, that's.
But who wrote this commentary?
Well, this is compiled, I guess I would say, by Strack and Billerbeck. This is volume 1.
Okay.
Wow.
Wait, how many volumes are there on Matthew?
No, I think this is the only one on Matthew. But yes, the only one on Matthew. This just has Matthew in it, but
That's
it's a crazy amount Like, it was obvious that they had Christianity in their purview somewhere.
Well, clearly, but yeah.
There are bits that were censored out by Christians in the Middle Ages because they were considered to be, blasphemous against
That tracks.
Jesus. Because there are a couple of stories of different people with the same name, and some of them are eerily similar to the Jesus story.
Yeah, if you read
and it's like not sure if any of them are actually supposed to be or not. Maybe they are, but they're like written in such language that it could be vague, I guess. But Christians still saw it as being offensive, and they censored it out.
I've heard Christians say that Jesus ben Ananias was their guy, and that there was another Jesus, James, or brother of Jesus the Anointed, or whatever, that was their guy, right? So anybody named Jesus, basically, according to Christians, was their Jesus, even if they lived in the wrong century.
And Jesus is the same name as Joshua, so many a prophet could take that name if they were trying to reclaim their place as a nom de plume, obviously. But there's a ton of messiahs mentioned in Josephus, not the bit that they inserted about how Jesus totes was really for here, guys, but the actual parts of Josephus. And also, even in Acts, in Luke Acts, there is a description of how there were many other messiahs, most of them named Judas, because anti-Semitism is how we roll. But literally in the trial of Paul, the last trial of Paul in Jerusalem before the Sanhedrin at that time, before he appeals to Caesar and goes off and gets taken to Rome and then vanishes. Was it Gamaliel? Gamaliel. Thank you. I couldn't remember how to pronounce it. He literally is written in as saying, because he was a very renowned, wise, sage member of the Jewish leadership and rabbi. But I
think the Christians call him Gamaliel.
Gamaliel,
like with an extra A.
I've heard many different weird pronunciations. But he's written. He was a rabbi. He was a well-respected Jewish rabbi, but he's written into the story as saying that you see all these other messiahs came and then they died and their followers were scattered. So, we cannot fight against this man, because if what he's saying is false, their followers will be scattered and it'll come to nothing. But if he's of God, then you will find yourself fighting against God. And I mean, this is obviously very made up and we're putting all the smart people on our side of the argument right in, but it's the admission is there that there were tons of other messiahs. There was a fucking plague of messiahs. It was Life of Brian, some messiah on every corner practically.
One of my favorite quotes out of Jesus Christ Superstar is when Pilate says, "You Jews produce messiahs by the sackful."
Yeah.
Okay, so 40 minutes in.
If you get 100 foreskins in a sack, it turns into a messiah.
Just add water.
Yeah.
So 40 minutes in. Now I'm starting my commentary. Okay, so on on verse 1. Joshua, by then a very old man. Joshua, being elderly, is mentioned previously in 13:1. Nelson writes that the repetition of Joshua's old age demonstrates that chapters 13 to 21 were subsequently added to the DH version of Joshua. Dozeman writes that the motif of Joshua's old age in chapter 23 is based solely on the addition in 13 verses 1b through 6. On verse 3, Nelson comments, "It is only in this chapter that nations, quote-unquote, is used in Joshua for Israel's enemies, although the usage is common in Deuteronomy and elsewhere in DH. Perhaps this is a sort of cross-reference to Deuteronomy 7:1. The role of the previous generation as witnesses to Yahweh's deeds is typical of Deuteronomistic theology, as in Deuteronomy 4 verses 3, 9, and 10, and Judges 2, 7, and 10. The assertion that the divine warrior fights for Israel reflects 10 verses 14 and 42 and is important for DH, as in Deuteronomy 1:30 and 3:22. On verse 4, Butler notes that the second half of the verse is problematic, changing from reference to the future allotment of remaining nations to a boundary description, to a reference to past destruction of nations, and back to a boundary description. He notes the opinion of Gratz and Steuernagel that, quote, all the nations that I've cut off, end quote, be transposed before from the Jordan, and that, quote, and unto he, end quote, be added before Great Sea. Similarly, Dozeman and Zakovitch follow Steuernagel's solution. Nelson writes that, quote, all the nations that I have cut off, end quote, is awkwardly placed and is presumably a misplaced gloss. On verse 5, he will drive them out before you. Septuagint attests to a different reading after this phrase, quote, he shall utterly destroy them from before you until they perish, and he shall send wild beasts against them until he utterly destroys them and their kings from before you, and inherit their land, as the Lord your God spoke to you, end quote. Butler summarizes the opinions regarding this verse, quote, Hollenberg suggests that Septuagint has the proper text, which has fallen from MT through homo eo teleuton. Holmes counters that it is a deliberate work of a Hebrew scribe who summarized the omitted words with, quote, he will dispossess them from before you, end quote. Steuernagel points to Deuteronomy 7:20 as the source, to which Sojin adds Exodus 23:28. A much more likely candidate is Leviticus 26:22, in which Hakrita also occurs. The reference to the kings might be corruption from the Leviticus passage or midrashic joining to Joshua 10:40, 11, 12, and 17, and Deuteronomy 7:24. Only one thing is clear. The tradition has interpreted the passage to the extent that the original reading cannot be recovered. Nelson retroverts Septuagint, saying it could have been lost by haplography in MT, while MT material absent from Septuagint may also represent haplography.
So we can't get the original back without a time machine, basically.
That's usually
I want to throw in here that Kip Davis made another comment and hits to Tomer. Says, give up, Tomer. I have attempted the same sort of cat herding on Diablo critics, and it is hopeless.
Well,
don't say we're hopeless. Also, shout out to Eric Wander for Tomer. OMG, let's go. Because we haven't read that comment yet. And we love you, Eric. Mwah.
Cool.
Did I miss a comment?
No.
It was a pinned comment or a membership
comment.
Yeah, it was a membership comment. I didn't post all the comments about Tomer because then we wouldn't get to the Bible in this show.
I just noticed it highlighted as a membership comment. But yes, you have many fans, Tomer.
See, even the dogs agree, Tomer. See?
Yeah. Unfortunately, the other dog doesn't care.
Yeah. There was a comment about how Aaron said just add water, and someone's like, no, it should be olive oil or maybe extra virgin olive oil to make a Messiah. Yeah.
Grow your own Messiah.
That's funny.
Do you want me to continue, or is are the dogs still barking, Aaron? Instructions unclear. I made a golem.
Continue, Tomer.
Thank you. Verses 6 through 8, Nelson comments, a, quote, democratization of obedience, end quote, in verses 6 to 8, redirects the imperatives first addressed individually to Joshua in 1 verses 6 to 9, to the people as a whole. This resonates with the public display and reading of the law to the entire nation in 31 and 34. The deviation warned against in verse 6 is defined by the reiterated prohibitions of verse 7, while the Deuteronomistic expression cling to Yahweh in verse 8 expresses its antithesis. The first prohibition of verse 7, literally go into, may refer to sexual contacts. To cause oaths to be taken in the name of an alien god would be to acknowledge that God's power and authority, according to Deuteronomy 6:13 and 10:20.
Does anyone else feel occasionally like Yahweh is just a little Eric Cartman going, respect my authority?
I'm just wondering about this reference to alien gods. And when do we get to Xenu?
Yeah. Well, you know, that was 12 trillion years ago, which is a time that totally existed for real.
Let me jump in with Eric Wander again for another comment. These are sometimes seen as a duplication, Josh. 23 being later than Josh 24, and in certain respects modeled on it. Can this be two different traditions or sources?
So for 23 and 24.
Yeah, is it a continuous work? Is 24 based on 23?
I'm not sure. I'd have to check, but we can. I mean, definitely by the end of today's stream, we can definitely talk about that more.
I think the 24 talks about a renewal of the covenant again, which is like that seems to be something every time that you have a new source, they go into a story of how they totally read this all to everybody and they were totally on board. We totally renewed the covenant and you're all still bound by it, bitches.
Essentially, we'll see how they feel about it, and then
Yeah, I want to mention that somebody pointed out that it is Atheist Day, and it is in fact Atheist Day. A month or two ago, I was scheduled to be at an event, I think in Austin, to celebrate Atheist Day. We've done a couple of these where there would be like a big rally kind of thing at the state capitol and all that, but they weren't able to put it together this year. Sorry to say, but it is in fact Atheist Day, so let's call that out. And I want to also mention, while I'm on the topic, that 1 week from today, I will be in Philadelphia for the American Atheist National Convention. So if you're in Philly, come down to the NatCon Hotel, and if you can't pay to do the entry, just come into the lobby and order from the bar, and we'll probably be in there to chat with you.
Nice. I just need my more atheist flair. So.
Yeah.
Ooh.
Okay, I'll continue my commentary. Verses 9 through 16, Dozeman comments, the second half of the speech is also composed from late Deuteronomistic texts, while containing a variety of distinctive motifs. The Deuteronomistic motifs include the reference to nations greater and stronger than you, found in Deuteronomy 4:38, 7:1, 9:1, and 11:23, the image of one Israelite warrior pursuing 1,000 in Deuteronomy 32:30, the command not to intermarry in Deuteronomy 7:3, the description of the nations as a snare in Hebrew mokesh in Deuteronomy 7:16, and the requirement that Israel not make a covenant with the nations, Deuteronomy 7:2. The speech also departs from Deuteronomistic style. The description of the remaining nations as a potential trap in Hebrew pach, for example, is absent from Deuteronomy, as is the phrase a thorn velashotat in your sides and pricks tzinanim in your eyes. I think I remember leshotet, which echoes Numbers 33:55, where the remaining people in the lands are described as barbs in Hebrew sikim in your eyes and pricks tzinanim in your sides. Yet even in this case, the motifs diverge. Finally, the additional warning that Israel not clinch, in Hebrew v'davaktem, to the nations also departs from Deuteronomy, which restricts the motif to underscore obedience to Yahweh, to him, Yahweh, you shall clinch, in Deuteronomy 10:20 and 13:4.
Sorry, did you say clinch?
Clinch, yeah. I'm a bit tipsy. I'm a bit
tipsy.
Yeah, I'm a bit tipsy.
Well done, given the tipsy level. But yeah, I mean, I think this just underlines what Lawrence was saying, what we've all been batting around, that this part is very likely, if not entirely written by, at least heavily, edited and redacted and whatnot by a priestly source, exilic, post-exilic writer. And, its current form is definitely due to some of the Ezra Nehemiah vibe school of the don't touch the dirty foreign locals.
Yeah, and I also wanted to answer Eric's question here. So, because this is in Smen's paper in Reconsidering Israel and Judah. In a treatment of chapter 23, chapter 24 must not be overlooked. The points of contact are obvious. In both chapters, Joshua convenes the Israelites. Both times he gives a speech in which he presents the previous acts of Yahweh on the basis which he appeals to them to decide for him. It has long been accepted that chapter 24 served as the model for the composition of chapter 23. Knox first made the suggestion, then renounced it, and then came back to it again. The sequence of the two chapters has always presented greater difficulties. Knox, proceeding from what was for him an unquestioned assumption that chapter 23 belonged to the Deuteronomistic history, argued as follows. The Deuteronomist can hardly have incorporated into his work the narrative he used for a model. Instead, in the Deuteronomistic editing, it was included secondarily as an appendix in the Deuteronomistic book of Joshua. But Joshua 23 does not come from the Deuteronomistic historian, and what we have previously said about the author's attitude to chapter 23 in relation to the texts that lay before him can also hold for its relation to Joshua 24. His purpose here was not to replace the older text any more than in chapters 1 and 13. Rather, he left it in as an appendix after he had revised its basic message for his own time. The double summons to the assembly, so that's 23:2 and also 24:1, must have been less of a problem for him than for us. The repetition of 13:1 and in 23:1 shows that he was not finicky about such things. But then it also goes on to say that Joshua 23, like the text, like other texts that he discussed in this paper, was inserted into the pre-existing literary context of the Deuteronomistic history, and it's kind of supposed to be seen as just supplementing the other text. So that was just to answer Eric's question there from before.
Yeah, absolutely. So even the earlier scholarship where the assumption of the unity of the Deuteronomist source was far more deeply ingrained and, kind of assumed to be so, even then they recognized that 23 was not exactly pure Deuteronomist. So, yeah.
It also seems a little weird, like if you compare 23 and 24, like in 23, he's talking about how he's going to die, how he's old, and then there's all this exhortation. And then 23, there's like this whole assembly. It's like, how do you go from like, I'm tired, here's my last insights for you before I take off. And now there's like this whole event. So yeah, it really does seem like it's not very continuous, from one to the next.
Yeah, I think the kind of taking up again of the age of Joshua is very much indicative of that.
I mean, it's not nearly as padded out as the death of Moses or Jacob. Jacob died like 6 times in a row, I swear. But yeah, he does seem to be talking an awful lot for someone who's apparently just this close to a corpse.
I do want to point something out here that's often overlooked by most Christian readers. And it's this little phrase that's kind of tricky to translate. I don't know if you guys have any insight, but on verse 14, where the net says, look, today I'm going to die, but it's really more like literally, I'm going to the way of all the earth. I wonder if you guys know what sounds like an idiomatic expression, and it really does sound like a missed opportunity. If there's like a heaven, where this would have been, for Joshua could have said, I'm going to the Lord, or, I'm going back to Yahweh or something, but it's like, I'm just going to perish like everything else perishes. Like there's no difference really after you die. It's all just over.
There's a man who read Ecclesiastes.
Yeah, there you go. I think that's a good point, though. I think that we've often in the atheist community propounded the myth that religion started to address our fear of death. And well, to a certain degree, yes, obviously trying to control natural forces so we don't, die in terrible and unnecessary ways. Yeah, famine, flood, whatever. But the concept of an afterlife is not how this started. Religion was about managing hopes and expectations in this life, and death was recognized to be a part of life for a long time because it is. And I think I honestly wonder, and granted, this is my thoughts, I have not done a research paper or anything, if the more clear it became that religion had nothing to offer with regard to actually controlling our physical circumstances, the more hopes had to be pushed out of the immediate circle of reality into greater and further fantasies.
Such as heaven.
And hell.
Mm-hmm. I think maybe something else too here is that, it's a lot of Christians look at Joshua like a model or a type of Christ. But then when it comes to him dying like an old man and tired and just giving up and that be the end of his ministry or whatever. But that does not often translate over to Jesus, who's got this whole other second life ahead of him. It's just inconsistent.
Do you want to continue? I've seen some comments.
We're waiting on you.
Do you want to read the comments first, or?
You're right.
Yeah.
So, yes, LAG Studios. Don't know if it's appropriate to ask here, but since this is an atheist channel, I might as well try. Do fine folk have any advice for H?
It continues. Do fine folks have any advice for how to live a meaningful life as an atheist?
What do you mean by meaning?
Oh yeah. Oh, okay. There you go. So the find a passion, I guess, and try your best and in the safest way possible pursue it, because I know in some cases that's just not a possibility for people. But small steps to get to the point where you want to be. And
yeah, I spent several years of my life just living to live, and just to enjoy the moment that I'm in. And my life didn't have to mean anything. I was perfectly happy being largely unnecessary, but just appreciating everything that I experienced, and that was fine. Now, now I feel that I have meaning, I guess. The way I put it is, if you want your life to have meaning, you have to decide what that is, and then work to that end.
I think meaning is the property of a mind. We forget that a lot of times, and we want to assign it just sort of to the whole universe out there. Your life has meaning to you, and it has meaning to the people who have meaning to you. If you want your life to be meaningful, make it meaningful to another person. Make a choice about who you want to be. The meaning of your life is what you play out in your choices, how you live, and your mistakes too, which, you can choose to learn from, because we all make them, or you can choose to be the kind of person who blames others and does all these things. And we'll all make the wrong choice on that one too sometimes. Yeah. But it's you have a world of possibilities to explore all of your life. Art, science, the pursuit of truth, beauty, love, sex, food, just everything. Everything is here. There are so many different ways you can go. And sometimes that choice is quite intimidating and overwhelming, and that's okay too. But
one of the comments I made that I was quoted on quite often is, if you want your life to have meaning, try making someone else's life meaningful.
Yeah. And that's been, you're not the first atheist to say something very similar to that. I remember that quote from you, but also something very similar from Colonel Ingersoll, who I quote frequently. He found great meaning in the love of his wife and children and his family, and he thought that was the most wonderful heaven that anyone could ever ask for, and didn't understand why that wasn't enough for people to have, the love of kin and home and all of this, which annoyed his critics to no end, of course, because they wanted him to be evil and godless and loveless.
Yeah,
I
get accused all the time of being sad because I'm atheist. Really?
I feel like it's because of the people you're talking to, because you're talking to it's like Sheldon when he's like, one cries because one is sad. I cry because others are stupid, and that makes me sad.
Yeah, but I'm so not sad. I mean, I'm
No,
actually a
when
whole
you're
lot better
talking
off.
with Ken Hovind, though.
Yeah, well, the thing that I feel, I've met a lot of Christians, sincere Christians, people who really believe, who maybe don't have the wherewithal not to believe, but they sincerely believe, and their lives are shit. They are constantly plagued by terrible financial and medical problems, and it's just one of the things that bothers me is that these people don't deserve how awful their lives are, and just always are. And they manage to trudge through it, and that's saddening for me, especially that there's nothing wrong with them. There's nothing they did to deserve this kind of thing. And then I see on the other side people with absolutely no empathy, no compassion, no accountability, nothing at all. Absolute narcissists who just stomp on everybody, get everything. They're completely rewarded for everything, and they don't appreciate a damn thing. And they're the ones that.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Oh no, I was agreeing with you. Sorry, I forget sometimes I'm not muted, and I'm like, yeah. But also a lot of those same Christians, the good ones, the kind, generous, good-hearted people, they are taught that all their righteousness is filthy rags, and their only good in them is of God, and if they do anything good, it's to God. And I was like, excuse you, like, God does not deserve these people as believers. These people are better than him. They deserve credit for the good that they do, for the family that they help, for the charity that they do. They are good people. They don't need him. And so I was offended on their behalf from that.
I think
reading the next comment. I'm sorry.
Before I continue, Peter, please fix the screen. Thank you.
Okay.
And include me as well.
Mark, were you going to say something?
Yeah, I was just going to quickly say that one of the things that I remember as a former Christian that I think many of us would like when it came to like looking for purpose or meaning, because we're so like in the belief and in the ideology that we figuratively look up for meaning. We spend most of our time looking up for meaning in life by looking up, right? And we sort of like build this whole story about like what heaven's going to be like and what I'm going to do and stuff like that. Like, for example, me, I took up woodworking because I thought that in heaven I would like spend my time like building stuff for people and, building homes and creating stuff. That we forget to look around. And that's the problem. That if you do look around, meaning like other people right outside of you, you will find purpose and meaning very quickly. So just give up the notion that there's any meaning or any purpose coming from above or in a future, but just look at the present and the now and look at everyone around you.
Yeah, it's surprising to me that believers want to be a tool of some other being's purpose, that whatever purpose of life that they have was decided by somebody else. And maybe you're just a pawn who's meant to die in service of something greater by somebody else's standards, because it's your life being sacrificed, largely unnecessary. I don't understand the idea of wanting there to be a meaning to life that you didn't decide, that isn't a meaning for your life. The whole why are we here, why do things exist rather than not exist, it's a stupid question to me. The very idea, when somebody says what is the meaning of life, that is one of the stupidest questions to me, because it's like when the fortune tellers spread out the tea leaves, or they read the tarot cards after being shuffled 52 times, or when they cast out the chicken bones. All of these things are ultimately random. They don't mean anything, but you're going to interpret whatever you want them to mean.
I just want to say one thing about what Christians want. There is a very big difference between what an individual Christian as their true authentic self actually wants and what they've been taught that they must and should want, or else they are a horrible person. And because that type of Christianity attacks your identity, your core sense of self, any threat to one of those things they've been taught that they must want is just reacted to violently and unthinkingly, usually verbally, not always, but just reacted against, not because they actually want to be a tool and a slave, but because they're told that their only possibility for self-realization, to be a good person or to be loved by the being that is apparently love itself, is to want that thing. And so, and that goes way under logic, that goes straight to your emotional core, your identity, your ego, whatever you, however you want to conceptualize that with psychology, I don't care. The point is that question and the fear underlying the way it is asked is a visceral psychological reaction to an abusive and coercive doctrine. And logic, however accurate it may be in the response, is not going to help that person.
We got another comment from Yahooligan, who offers $5 Canadian. It says, I'm also looking forward to having you on my wavelength later this afternoon. I don't, make sure that you to contact me again to give me a link, because I can't find that link for later this afternoon if you ever gave it to me. So make sure you give it to me again. All right. And then I think we've already we answered that last one. Okay,
I'll continue my commentary. I have 3 more. Don't worry. On verse 13, snares and traps. In Hebrew, it's lepach velemokesh. This term is also found in Isaiah 8:14. Ahituv writes that this is an imagery derived from hunting fowls. And yeah, I'm tipsy. Sorry. This laugh about it. Yeah, that this is an imagery derived from hunting fowls and beasts. But the exact distinction between pach and mokesh is uncertain. He writes that the general understanding is that mokesh refers to the entire trapping system, and pach refers to the moving part of the mokesh. This is based on the etymology of pach from the root pei chet chet, to be loose, in Akkadian, Syriac, and Arabic. However, in other texts, pach is used to describe the whole apparatus, as in Jeremiah 18:22, Hosea 9:8, and Amos 3:5. On the whips on your backs, the Hebrew for whips is shotet, which is a hapax. Septuagint has nails, Vulgate stumbling block, the Peshitta spearheads, and Targum troops-bearing armor. Rashi took leshotet as a verb, to prowl, and thus they will prowl, yeshotetu, around you to loot and ransack. Kimchi writes that the word is similar to shot, whip. Butler writes that this is a copyist error for the similar shotim. And finally, on verse 16, the Lord's anger will burn against you, and you will quickly perish from the good land he has given you. This is absent from the Septuagint. Zakovitch notes that this sentence is similar to that of Deuteronomy 11:17, and suggests that it might have been copied from Deuteronomy. He adds that the person who added this segment here did not understand that the first half of verse 16 is a conditional statement, which its fulfillment is in verse 15. That person, therefore, understood the first half of verse 16 as the beginning of a conditional statement which requires fulfillment. Nelson, however, suggests that the MT is original, and the Septuagint lost the first half of the verse through haplography. Butler writes that the evidence appears to favor MT as original, though it is not impossible to understand verse 16a as an interpretation of verse 15b, which then itself was interpreted through verse 16b. And that's it for my commentary on 23. You're muted, Darren.
Yep. Well, I wasn't saying anything either.
Oh.
But okay, so we're ready to move without commentary into the next chapter?
I will say that the next chapter is, oh boy, my commentary on this is long.
Okay. All right. I was expecting
this is the bit where Joshua, right,
people on the panel.
Arn,
right, that's fine.
This is the bit where Joshua.
And you still have a comment to read.
Do we have another one? Okay.
Oh.
Oh yes. SLAG Studios offers 20 Swedish kroner and says, I thank you so much for your answer. You're welcome. Okay, so I will jump into 24.
Read
to what?
Read
what?
to 15.
Read to 15. Okay. Then Joshua gathered all the tribes of Israel to Shechem and summoned the elders, the heads, the judges, and the officers of Israel. And they presented themselves before God. And Joshua said to all the people, "Thus says the Lord, the God of Israel, long ago your ancestors, Terah and his sons Abraham and Nahor, lived before the Euphrates and served other gods that apparently existed just like the one we worship. Then I took your
Beyond the
father
Euphrates,
Abraham
no?
for what?
Is it
What?
is it before the Euphrates or beyond the Euphrates?
Beyond the
matter.
Euphrates. Sorry. Then I took your father Abraham from beyond the river and led him through all the land of Canaan and made his offering many. I gave him Isaac, and to Isaac I gave Jacob and Esau. I gave Esau the hill country of Seir to possess, but Jacob and his children went down to Egypt. Then I sent Moses and Aaron, and I plagued Egypt with what I did in the midst, and afterwards I brought you out, after I confused the Pharaoh and made him change harden his heart and dragged the story out a bit. And then I sent Moses and Aaron, plagued Egypt and in its midst, and afterwards I brought you out. And then I brought your ancestors out of Egypt. You came to the sea, and the Egyptians pursued your ancestors with chariots and horsemen to the Red Sea. When they cried out to the Lord, he put darkness between you and the Egyptians and made the sea come upon them and cover them. And your eyes saw what I did to Egypt. My eyes weren't there. But anyway, afterwards, you lived in the wilderness for a long time. Then I brought you to the land of the Amorites, who lived on the other side of the Jordan. They fought with you, and I handed them over to you, and you took possession of their land, and I destroyed them before you, even though I also wandered you around for 40 fucking years, got you to the river and said, see, on the other side of the river, you can't have it. I promised it, but you can't have it. But now we're doing a different story today. Then King Balak, the son of Zippor, and Moab set out to fight against Israel. He sent and invited Balaam, son of Beor, to curse you. But I would not listen to Balaam or his donkey. Therefore he blessed you. So I rescued you out of his hand. When you went over to the Jordan, I came to Jericho. The citizens of Jericho fought against you, and also the Amorites and Perizzites and Canaanites and Hittites, the Girgashites and Hivites and Jebusites, and I handed them over to you, even though they're all my people. And I kill everyone I create. I sent the hornet ahead of you, which drove out before you the two kings of the Amorites. It was not by your sword, nor by your bow. I gave you a land of which you had not labored, and towns which you had not built, and you live in them. You eat the fruit of the vineyards and olive groves that you did not plant, you lazy bastards. Now, therefore, revere the Lord and serve him in sincerity and faithfulness. Put away the gods that your ancestors served before the river in Egypt and serve the Lord. Now, if you are unwilling to serve the Lord, choose this day whom you will serve, whether the gods your ancestors served in the region beyond the river, or the gods of the Amorites in whose land you are living. But as for me and my household, we will serve the Lord. You said to 15, right?
Yes, I did. I just waited for anybody to speak.
I choose the goddess.
Yeah, one of the things that I do want to know, and I'm sure Tomer's going to get into this. This text has been incredibly controversial. So the ideas span from actual tradition that goes back to Shechem to kind of like a Syrian period, or even during the exile. So there's quite a long range that people fall into, right? Because we're getting like, especially in this first part, right? We're getting a lot of the history that we've already heard, but it's nowhere near all of it, right? It's huge, but and then it kind of ends off, at least in this section that we've heard so far, about the idea about, don't be serving other gods and stuff. So it really depends on your like initial outlook of like the Pentateuch and the rest of the Deuteronomistic history and the setting that it was written in, and how they constructed it. So it would have to be part of like a much more full model, because there's a lot of stuff that goes into this. You have this you not only have like the list at the beginning and the references to the patriarchs, but you also have like the stuff about Balaam and Balak, and goes through all these all the people that fought against them, right? So it's kind of telling that history again. So there is we're going to notice as we go on far more similarities between this chapter and the last. But yeah, it's very important to note that it has been very, very controversial.
I have to say, my first thought, as it strikes me, is that although there may have been additions to, align it with parts of the previous history that had been perhaps edited, it does seem like there's a Deuteronomistic core, because the Deuteronomistic source is, advocating henotheism, but you've not yet got to the none of the other gods exist, our God is the only God of the, the exilic, post-exilic period. So that other gods, speaking of them as though they exist, although albeit somewhat derogatorily, obviously, definitely has that feel. But yeah, the idea that could have been, edited and had additional bits put in the exilic period.
See, it's not only that, not just the placement of this text, but the composition of just this one chapter as well, because I think Sperling argues for its unity, which I'm not totally sold on. But yeah, the thing is, yeah, there's also a lot of argument around that.
Yeah, it's scholarship, right? There's always arguments. There are several things that are clearly, definitely not true. For example, this was not written by Joshua, but that doesn't mean that there aren't several reasonably legitimate positions one can hold in debating,
Yeah, there's a lot of weird verses in this chapter that are like that doesn't really match what we've already read. Whether it's talking about what happened at the Red Sea, or who bought the burial place, or yeah, it's interesting.
There's definitely different traditions, but there's also an attempt to kind of create unity and coherence here, which gives an impression of a later redactor trying to draw it all together. But again, the Deuteronomist would have written before Genesis was put together. That was put together. Again, not all the source material was written, but it was assembled exilic, post-exilic. You're talking about like putting together the bits. So there may have been some exilic, trying to sort it out a little bit, create a bit of a coherent narrative there. But yeah.
Not just like a compositional one, but like so for a lot of this we can say, okay, they were using some other source material. Especially since like in the rest of the Deuteronomistic history they explicitly cite source material. But we already got a little bit of that, right, with the Jasher, for example. So they already have source material, but the issue is that just like basically all ancient histories, they change that source material quite a bit, because they are telling the same story from a different lens. So you're dealing with not only a compilation, but you're dealing with a compilation of retellings. So it gets even more complicated. So trying to get to the bottom of what the original text was is such an incredibly difficult question.
I was listening to actually a Theremin Trees video yesterday. He's really brilliant, looks at religion and psychology, and he he has wonderful videos, long form, definitely deep dives, but brilliant. And he brought up the point that humans will tend towards, at least en masse, will tend towards the easiest, most lazy thinking solution that's still quasi-viable. I mean, we talk about this all the time, and I'm always trying to say, like, even what I'm saying is a simplification. It's not that simple. Lawrence is like, this, that, and the next thing. Tomer brings all of these different point of views to bear. It's complicated. Looking at the assessment here, what's not complicated is shutting down your brain and saying there are no contradictions. It is all of God, and it's not honest. It's not true. But damn it is easy, especially if you really don't want to think about the details.
You know what I find interesting too is that Joshua, if I'm reading verse 2 of 24 correctly, he's actually he's quoting Yahweh. But the author hears they don't relate to us any sort of like encounter where he heard Yahweh say this to him, like we would in the book of Numbers or in Exodus with Moses. So this just popped into his mind, or like, how do we explain that?
Well, like I said, Genesis was compiled exilic, but the stories of Abraham and Isaac and Jacob are obviously all much older and from multiple sources, potentially. I mean, yeah. Although it is an argument for exilic influence in this chapter, definitely.
Wasn't there someone who called into the line or something, and they literally admitted that they thought that when thoughts appear in their head, that was from God?
Oh, yeah.
Wow.
Or
that
demons.
That is something.
That's what you're taught. That's what perfectly
that they knew it was
sane
divine
people
revelation
are taught.
because
yeah, and then
I know it was God because
like,
it appeared in my brain without me.
If you have peace about it, then that means that God really was talking to you.
Or you should test all things by scripture. So if your thoughts line up with what you think scripture says, then it's of God. But if they don't and they challenge you, then unless they're directly from the Bible, then they're of Satan. And even if they quote the Bible, Satan can also quote the Bible, so they might also be of Satan. Good way to keep you chained in your little fence.
I heard this one on TikTok. I was messing up with people's lives and going into their lives arguing. Someone said to me, well, you do know that the devil knows the Bible better than everybody else. So he uses Bible knowledge to trick people into disbelief. I just thought that was crazy.
So the Bible or the devil knows that he loses in the end, and that this is inevitable, and that there's nothing he can do about it.
Yeah, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. This is 1980s Saturday morning cartoon villain thinking. Okay?
Yep.
Don't make it complicated. Evil man is evil because evil. Mwahaha.
Hold on while I twirl my waxed mustache and say,
but apparently but you can confuse the devil if you cut your nails out of order. So, as long you just do it skip one, and do it, that will confuse him, and he won't curse you. It's like
what I like about the devil is how Billy Markham managed to outwit the devil, and so did the fiddler in Georgia. It's the fact that the devil has honor on his name, and will agree to keep his word.
He actually
where the Christians don't.
And as I pointed out last time, God never kept his word. They're all like, oh, all the promises were fulfilled. I'm like, I've read Judges. No, the fuck they were not.
Yeah, that reminds me of Trump rallies.
God doesn't, according to the actual script.
So Eric Wander says the shift of location from Shiloh to Shechem is unheralded. Some archaeology has been done in ancient Shechem, but what do we know about Shiloh and this change of location?
I mean, my guess is that any kind of shift would be for some cultic ideology, but I'm not entirely sure.
I mean, it's possible it's
I
just
think the
two
chapter
different
ends.
source materials, one set in Shechem and one in Shiloh, and they just kind of glossed over it.
So it doesn't
Luke Snyder
explicitly
says,
say. Oh, I was going to say
Go
it
ahead,
doesn't
Isaac.
explicitly say that the temple was moved. I think that's what he's saying. Like them moving between cities isn't the problem. It's where it says, before the Lord, and I think it mentions the temple later in the, and it's like,
The
well, the temple
tabernacle?
was in Shiloh. How did it get to Shechem? And it doesn't explain it, but I think there is one of the explanation I think makes sense of why they want his last speech to be in Shechem is because I think that's where his traditional burial place is.
That
Isn't
makes
that
sense.
isn't it in Timnat Serach? Which is
Sorry?
Isn't that in Timnat Serach?
Also at the end here, bones of Joseph,
Yeah.
which the
So
Israelites
maybe that was
had brought up from Egypt were buried at Shechem.
Right.
Maybe
right.
that was the
Bones of
tradition.
Joseph to be buried in his own land.
Yeah, so that could have been the older tradition that this story was built off.
Fair enough. Could be.
And then
wasn't it also true that the tribe of Levi actually surrounded the temple ground or the tabernacle at this moment? So bring all of the tribes into that area. If that was Shiloh where the temple was, logistically maybe it wouldn't have made sense because of the limitations of who can go where. But I'm just speculating.
Could be.
Do we know how big Shechem was compared to Shiloh? And
I mean, someone probably does. I don't, but someone probably does.
Of all the
Yeah.
random
I think
bits
Shiloh
of
is more like.
information, I don't keep that at the top of
Yeah.
my brain. Sorry.
I think Shiloh is like the temple was in Shiloh because like in later books it talks about Shiloh being used as a cultic center, right? Like the northern tribes.
Yeah. It was
Shiloh one of their centers.
We definitely know that it was a big cultic center. That is true.
Okay. Yeah, that makes that.
Luke Snyder.
That one fits in with archaeology. I remember that.
Luke Snyder says, what laws are applicable to this, and what does the controversy say about empires in the Levant?
Laws?
I actually don't know what this is referring
I guess
to.
what specifically?
I feel like we need to know what we were talking about at the moment that comment was made. So
Right.
Yeah, that was about 10 minutes ago.
Dude, I don't even remember what we were talking about 10 minutes ago.
Yeah. And then we'll have to come back to that. Give us a clarifying question, if you would, please, Luke. And then Eric Wander says, who bought the sepulcher in Shechem from the sons of Hamor? Was it Jacob, like it says here, or was it Abraham, like it says in Acts 7:16?
And in Genesis.
The New Testament is irrelevant for me. I'm sorry.
Yeah, the New Testament is irrelevant, but it did say that Abraham bought the tomb in Genesis that we already went over, although that was like a fucking year ago. So.
Hey, but I thought the New Testament was inspired by the Holy Spirit, ergo it cannot be wrong.
Well, the Holy Spirit was drunk.
It was
Maybe
doing
it was
for
for
It
us.
was celebrating for him. There we go.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah.
We all had the same thought.
Yeah, I think there's probably an apologetic of why it says that Jacob bought the place. Kind of, there's probably like when he went to bury his wife, he had to buy it again or something like that. Something silly just to explain this verse.
Genuinely think that like Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob were just like legendary ancestral figures to different groups that were then woven together into a family tree to try and and retcon the whole we were always one people thing. I don't think if they ever existed, which I seriously doubt, that any of them had anything to do with each other.
Oh, really? It's not like Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and then Israel and the 12 sons.
I mean, Israel would definitely be a different tradition than Jacob that was also woven in together. But again, it's maybe the thing is, did something. It's all
like Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Textually speaking, they're usually put together. So like it is still a tough question. I think, and honestly, I know that I talk about this a lot, but there's 2 books on this that are really good. Van Setter's Abraham in History and Tradition, and
You do love
Thomas L. Thompson's History of City of the Patriarchs. They take
Mm.
very different approaches, but they essentially come to the same conclusions. Like they were cultural heroes. They were like kind of like the King Arthurs, right?
Mm.
They weren't real. That's
no. I don't think they were real in any sense. Like the Genesis is an account of anything real. Like sometimes legends are built a little bit on someone. Like there might have been some highwaymen who inspired the Robin Hood myths, kind of a vibe. Not any kind of actual dude riding a camel when they didn't exist around the desert.
Yeah, when they weren't domesticated.
Camels existed.
They weren't domesticated.
They weren't domesticated.
You mean the guy called Father of Multitudes wasn't a fictional character that was an ancestor of a nation? Like,
we got another comment from historical philosopher. Says, I was always under the impression that Genesis was compiled between the 3rd and 4th centuries BCE. It was not in there, but I'm sure it was implied.
Right. Yeah. I sure hope that was the implication. Otherwise, that'd be ridiculous. So the idea of putting it like that late to the 3rd century BC is an idea from Gmirkin. And Gmirkin, and the thing is, his whole thing is like based on like Hellenistic parallels, but he's like not talking at all about all the weird differences that are like explicitly Near Eastern. So like his hypothesis is just bad. But when it comes to if we're just talking about Genesis, then you could say it was like completed during like that time period, because then you would have the Joseph story, right? But like aside from that, like,
but it's pretty clear some part of the Joseph story was already prior to that.
The thing is, there's like even at the end of this chapter, right, we get stuff on the bones of Joseph. There's like the stuff on the house of Joseph and the tribe of Joseph in the Deuteronomistic history. So they very clearly had something like about Joseph, right? But it was nowhere near like the kind of story that we get. It's another case of like, hey, here's a tribal hero, essentially,
right? Yeah.
And if we kind of parallel the like how religions worked in the ancient world, especially in the place, like they were very dynamic, right? So like you could have like a certain god or a certain hero worshipped at a certain place, and it did nothing to like. They were very much allowed to be. It wasn't so strict. Like it wasn't at that point a religion of the book, you could say. So they didn't have like necessarily that kind of strict doctrine for how you could worship. And they had their cult centers, and you could see this in the rest of the ancient Near East. You can see that in ancient Greece. It was very dynamic, and because of that, you have certain cultural heroes being, they have some association beforehand, but then these grander myths are written about them. So, in my view, it would have been like, if we're excluding the Joseph story, it would be like because that is just a later addition to tie in together Genesis and Exodus, so which implies that the rest of it existed already. So that those two chunks at least existed, right? So without that, then I would probably date it to the 5th century at the latest for its writing.
Definitely. I'd like
somebody in the chat. Go ahead.
I was just going to suggest a parallel with regards to something, a similar phenomenon in religion that is somewhat better documented and we can research a little more clearly, is that the Catholic pantheon of saints, where they used it to frequently fold in local cults about this or that god or goddess. Sometimes they just, went direct opposition and felt they needed to wipe them out. But something like Bridget in the Celtic tales, Bridget was a goddess. They tried to kind of, take the wind out of their sails by making St. Bridget a saint. And people still kind of could then venerate, but also it was under the umbrella of Catholicism. And I feel that that may have been a very similar process here, obviously a little bit different with circumstances being what they were, but that folding in, the local heroic narrative and just trying to fold in as many different ones as you can from your group to try and create a sense of cohesion and coherence.
Yeah, I like that. I saw that happening. Well, I see that happening with the colonizers, the Catholic Church coming into the South Americas. If you look into like almost every like virgin myth out there, like Guadalupe, for instance, they're almost always
Huitzilopochtli. Yeah.
Yeah, and they're going to include some sort of interaction, some sort of manifestation with a local and deity or someone within the religion to sort of like corroborate like this cultural assimilation that's happening there. So, for example, in the Guadalupe Virgin tradition, there's a story of forget his name, Diego, who's the little boy who's I think he was an Aztec native, worshiper or something. And then he encountered this virgin, and out came like the painting and the, whatever that it's framed in a church somewhere now. And it's that basically the God approaching the native, sort of like making official the, that transcendent God made a connection with this group of people. And now that then is used to redefine the beliefs and the cultures and the practices with locally now, with that new belief and connection in mind. So I can see that happening, like throughout, the Levant, as empires are growing and swelling in size and lands are being conquered, that a lot of this cultural assimilation has to take place in order for like peace and prosperity to take place. Otherwise, they're always at war.
Yeah, fair enough.
Got another comment to read. So Iconic on the other phone says, can we have Tomer's pronunciation of Shiloh once? I keep hearing it in my head, but need the confirmation. Okay, so Americans pronounce it Shiloh, but Tomer, I think, pronounce it Shiloh.
Shiloh.
Yeah. Shiloh.
Shiloh. Shiloh. That's...
She get low.
All right, and then Eric Wander says, one more contradiction and I will shut up. LOL. Did Balak fight with Israel? Joshua 24:9 says yes, but Judges 11:25 says no. This last verse is a rhetorical question whose answer is no.
Same thing with the cursing in Numbers 23:7-8. It seems to also contradict that Balaam cursed.
Yeah.
Or called down this judgment here.
So they probably, when they always went together, right? Like Balak and Balaam always going together. So earlier in this series somewhere, I talked about the different traditions about Balaam that would also apply to Balak. So you would have a tradition where there is where Balaam is, great, and he didn't he didn't curse Israel. Good for him, yay Balaam. And then that would also apply to Balak's decision to fight against Israel. And then another tradition where it's, where he is awful and he cursed Israel. And yeah, both are in here.
He tried to curse Israel, but he didn't get away with it because magic, magic Uno reverse card. And I'm sorry, I'm looking at the chat and John.
Yeah, so it could be he cursed them or he didn't curse them, but from like reading
tried.
There's no. I think the issue here is that in our chapter it says that he got up fought them. I mean, a lot of translations seem
you could
to
say it's
gloss
some
over
sort
that,
of
but
a
it
spiritual
says that he
fight.
did fight them, not that he was getting ready to fight them.
You could say it was some sort of a spiritual fight if you wanted to. That's the kind of apologetic I would expect of. He was trying to curse them, so he was,
the curse itself is him fighting them.
Yeah, it's more. Yeah, it's not like literal sticks and swords.
But it is interesting that this chapter has like 4 or 5 things where it like goes over some of the things that happened in Exodus, but it gets all of them a little bit wrong. Even if you can excuse each of them individually, it's like, why does this chapter have like 4 things in a row that are slightly wrong?
Yeah. Trevor and Wright says, what exactly is the relationship between Joshua and Caleb in the context of the battle for Jericho, or is there any new insight about their lives after the conquest?
I mean, Trevor has all these questions with long answers, so...
Oh, is that... We're going to get to that in your commentary?
No.
Not in this one.
I don't think so. No. And my commentary is long. I think it's as long as the Song of Moses. So...
Okay.
We haven't even read this chapter. We've only got to 15.
Yes, we did. It's all your fault.
I was going to blame you.
Yeah, you always do.
I'm getting more booze. You guys argue over whose fault it is.
Historical philosopher. It's his fault. Okay. Most modern scholars accept that Genesis is a redacted literary work, reaching its final version as late as post-exilic Israel around 400 BC from Google search.
Right.
I want to clarify that question if I can a little bit. Most modern scholars accept that Genesis is a redacted literary work, reaching its final version as late as post-exilic. Lawrence, can you explain that?
Yeah. So what was asked before was the question was about the compilation of it. That's a different question, because the compilation of it is about putting together those different sources, those different Pentateuchal sources. The question of redaction is a different one. We would not call those other sources. So I wouldn't call it a compilation. It is certainly a redacted literary work. So the let's see, except that it's okay. So yeah, you'd have the compilation happen first, and then redactions happen upon that. Or you could have like a redacted thing that would later be put into a compilation, but that's much harder to actually get to. And yeah, when it's reaching its final version, like I said, for I don't know how that hair got so far back in my mouth. Okay, so the reaching its final version, yeah. So post-exilic, right? Of course, that is a wide range. And while I believe that the writing of these texts, at least for Genesis, were exilic or post-exilic, and it wouldn't have been too long after to actually compile them. But then you would have later redactions happening for quite a while. So the question you asked earlier was about the compilation, not necessarily the redactions.
Are you done?
Yeah.
Sorry.
I think we can.
Okay, I'll start my commentary. On verse 1.
You'll start your commentary?
Yes, indeed, Aaron. I haven't started it yet. What did you expect? You all were rambling about Celts and other stuff. Thank you, Peter.
I'm gonna go. I'll be right back. I'm gonna go earn a PhD real quick.
Yeah, you do that. Okay.
It's pronounced Celts, but I don't know where that came up.
I don't care. On verse 1.
Tomer is drunk. Let him read his commentary.
Yeah, on verse 1, on Shechem, the Septuagint reads Shiloh. Dozeman notes that most interpreters identify Shechem in the Masoretic text as the primary reading, with the Septuagint reference to Shiloh being a later change. He notes Barthelemy's opinion that the change in the Septuagint represents an anti-Samaritan revision, a suggestion which Butler and Zakovitch also proposed. Nelson writes that this change was in order to harmonize with 18:1 and with the presence of the tabernacle in Shiloh, found in 22 verses 12 and 19. On that same verse, they presented themselves before God. Kimchi and Apovaner wrote that this refers to the Ark of the Lord, where the Torah was put into. Ahituv, Nelson, and Zakovitch wrote that this refers to God's temple, seen in 1 Samuel 10:19. And Vulgate reads, they stood in the sight of the Lord. On verse 2, Terach, the father of Abraham and Nahor, several commentators note that this sentence does not fit with the preceding writing. Ahituv and Zakovitch propose that this sentence is an addition, with Zakovitch suggesting that a reader wished to remove the blame of idolatry from Abraham and presented Terach as the last of the idolaters. Butler, however, writes that the fathers are narrowed down specifically to Terach to show that the dividing line of service of other gods can be drawn with the decision of Abraham. Compare Genesis 12, verses 1 through 6. On verse 3, led him through Canaan, Hebrew Bible reads, I led him through all of the land of Canaan, as seen in the KJV and JPS. The Septuagint does not mention Canaan, and Dozeman comments, the Hebrew Bechol Eretz Canaan, in all the land of Canaan, focuses on the limited geographical area of Canaan. The inclusion of Canaan may be a later addition, according to Butler, but Jacqueline Moati Fine noted it is frequent in Josh, suggesting the Septuagint may be a shortened version. She added that the reference to land, ge, in Septuagint, without a determinative is rare, giving the expression an ambiguous meaning, perhaps to state the broad protection of Yahweh over Abraham from Egypt to Mesopotamia. In this case, the Septuagint is idealizing Abraham as a traveler on the model of the heroic Greek world travelers, as is illustrated, for example, by Hekateus of Miletus in Periodos Ges. On verse 4, I assigned the hill country of Seir to Esau. This reflects Genesis 36:8 and Deuteronomy 2:5, which state that God gave Seir to Esau as a possession. Gersonides writes that Esau was mentioned to explain why Israel did not fight against him. Some commentators felt that it was odd that Esau/Edom is viewed in such a positive view. Kara, for example, writes that God gave Seir to Esau, quote, so that he would leave the presence of his brother Jacob, end quote. Dozeman writes that this is especially puzzling if the composition is exilic or post-exilic, since Edom was widely condemned in the exilic and post-exilic southern prophetic literature, as seen in Jeremiah 49, Ezekiel 25, verses 12 to 14, Isaiah 34, etc. He further writes, researchers conclude that the hostility may have been over Edom's role in the destruction of Jerusalem or the Edomite incursion into the western side of the Jordan, in which the formation of the province of Idumea impinged on the southern territory of Judea. In view of this, some interpret the reference to Esau or his inheritance of land as a later gloss. Others date the text early to account for the positive portrayal of the Edomites. Anbar dates the positive reference to Esau to the post-exilic period, but he interprets the emphasis on the Transjordan to be a critique of the western incursion of the Edomites into the land of the Judeans. It is meant to underscore that the divine inheritance to Esau is confined to the Transjordan. But there is no critique of the Edomites in the book of Joshua, not even in their possession of land west of the Jordan River, as is evident in the positive portrayal of Caleb, in which the author specifically identifies him as an Edomite or Kenizzite. The author states that Caleb possesses the western territory surrounding Hebron as the fulfillment of the divine promise of land. The divine gift of land to Esau in the Transjordan and to Caleb in Hebron, 14 verses 6 to 15, 15 verses 30 to 19, represents the Sumerian author's view of Idumea as a divinely ordained possession of the Edomites, even though it impinges on the southern province of Yehud. On that same verse,
I was just going to say it's very interesting to see, because you can see throughout the entire Torah this conflicted relationship with Edom, where we're on their side, but we're not, but we made a deal with them, but we shouldn't have, but they are our family, but not really, but kind of. And it tends to very much flip-flop back and forth, which is, I mean, it's definitely a good argument for later, sort of glosses and arguments in the community playing out in the text. But yeah, it's very interesting.
On that same verse, Jacob and his family went down to Egypt. Septuagint adds, and became there a great and populous and mighty nation, and the Egyptians afflicted them. Nelson and Zakovitch prefer the Septuagint, with the former writing that the precursor of the MT, lacking the plus at the start of verse 5, lost a portion of text by haplography. He writes, however, that the similarity of Deuteronomy 26:5 makes it possible that the Septuagint is an expansion. On verse 5, then I sent Moses and Aaron. This is absent from the Septuagint. Zakovitch writes that these words are added by somebody who was surprised to see Moses and his brothers missing from the Exodus story. Butler and Nelson suggested that MT supplements from Micah 6:4. On that same verse, but by what I did there. Hebrew reads, Ka'asher asiti bekirbo. Commentators note that the Hebrew here is difficult. Translated literally, it reads, what I have done in its midst. Nelson writes that this can be understood as an economical reference to well-known details left unmentioned. He writes that the Septuagint with the signs, ... followed by Vulgate and Peshitta, reading Be'otot Asher, trying to alleviate the original on the basis of Numbers 14:11. This reading is supported by Ahituv and Zakovitch. On verse 6, when I brought your people out of Egypt, Hebrew Bible reads, when I brought your fathers out of Egypt. This is a repetition of the end of verse 5. Zakovitch writes that I brought your fathers is an addition to settle between what is told here, I removed you, and the known tradition that the generation who left Egypt died in the wilderness, Numbers 14, verses 28 to 35. He also notes that the phrase is absent from some Septuagint manuscripts. On verse 7, and he put darkness between you and the Egyptians. The word for darkness is ma'afel, which is a hapax. Ahituv writes that this refers to the pillar of cloud, as seen in Exodus 14:20. Quote, thus there was the cloud with the darkness, ha'anan v'choshech, end quote. Similarly, the Septuagint reads cloud and darkness. Nelson proposed that ma'afel is a deutography, with the original reading is vayasem ofel. Vayasem ofel, yeah. On verse 8, the Amorites, Dozeman comments.
Wait,
sorry.
Is it possible that this verse is could be referencing a much older version of the Exodus before the plagues became a major thing with 10 of them and everything, and it's possible that the darkness would have been, maybe happened with the crossing of the sea, and only later would have became a plague in of itself or something. I don't know.
That's an interesting hypothesis.
Darkness isn't mentioned anywhere else.
I know that in the narrative, the Exodus narrative with the cloud or fire, depending on the time of day, does come between them and the Egyptians for a time. Look, when they're at the edge while they're waiting for the wind to, create a magical pathway for them. So yeah, I wonder if that's related to. But yeah, it's very possible. There's a couple of different traditions and narratives.
It doesn't mention plagues at all, and then it just says darkness during by the sea, and it's like, that's interesting.
That is interesting. Oh, I wish we had Aaron's time machine. I really wish we do. I would sit in the Library of Alexandria and copy down everything.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so Kip Davis says, I'm actually starting to think that the Samaritans invented the Pentateuch.
Maybe he means I'm not sure if he means as like a book, as the book itself, or as a as the compilation.
Gosh, if only we had him on camera to clarify
if only.
what he means.
If only. He could totally share his thought process with us, and we might agree with him or provide useful feedback.
Does he mean like the modern Samaritans, or like the idea
of the modern Samaritans? They totally went back in time.
No, I mean,
created the Pentateuch.
No, I mean as in
Samaritans are Time Lords confirmed.
No, I mean like the Samaritans from the the Second Temple period, who who aren't necessarily the same people that were, in the land forever or whatever. Like,
Okay. Tomer, should I continue reading?
There is another comment.
All right. Oh, just popped up. Jada said, whoop, there's another one. Jada says, how much of the surviving Septuagint do we have today?
I think, once we include all of our, Septuagint manuscripts, like we can, while they do have plenty of differences, right? Like the thing is, these began to be written in the same period. So if you're talking about like the original, like the first Septuagint,
yeah, none of it.
nothing. But if you're talking about just Septuagints, which in general, which is just Greek Bibles, then you would have we have a lot of them, and we have different and they're different here and there, right? But we can kind of, while not,
I imagine thanks
not
to the
reconstructing
Christians, we
the
have
original.
a good number.
Right, yeah. Like you can take like the older or more important manuscripts, and at least what we have, it spans the whole Hebrew Bible. So like this one, I'm pretty sure this one has it has Syriac in here, it has Maccabees in here, I'm pretty sure. Actually, it does it might not. I have to check. But yeah, it has Tobit in here, Judith, Esdras, yeah. So it has.
I don't think I've ever read Tobit.
Like we have a whole bunch of Septuagint manuscripts, and from it we can definitely reconstruct like the Old Testament. So if that's what you're asking.
It's funny to me, questions like how much of this stuff that we have no idea how much is missing. So how much do we have? Well, 67%. How would we fucking know?
We can luckily for us, we can compare it to other textual traditions. So we can compare this to Hebrew
and other translations
or something. Yeah.
I did this bit at one point somewhere back in one of our videos, but I pointed out that when we talked about sourcing your P's and J's and E's and D's, we're talking about basically the various sources that were brought into the compilation of the Torah. It was during the Torah days, obviously, but we were talking about the sources that were put together basically around the time of the return from exile, because that was part of the law of the Persians. If you were going to go and be a vassal state, you had to have a coherent written law all set up. So they did that, and also put in their traditions and myths and narratives. And there you have the Pentateuch. Some later glosses and editings may apply, but that was basically what they had. But then when we talk about sourcing Mosaic versus Septuagint, around just before the time of Jesus, if he ever existed, a bunch of Jewish scholars in Alexandria did the translation to the Greek, which is the Septuagint. And we have older manuscripts of that than we have of the Hebrew Mosaic Bible, even though the Hebrew would have been the original language. But I think the oldest we have are what, like Middle Ages?
Yeah, they're all medieval.
Yeah, they're all medieval. So they're not as old as some of the Septuagint ones, which are pre-medieval, although not original. So
finally, he has arrived.
No, this is an imposter. This is Dr. Kill.
Which means that I'll never.
Nothing.
This means that I'll never finish my commentary.
Asid Taleb.
Yeah.
Oh,
and he's gone. All right.
He's gone.
Over can finish his commentary. All right.
Yeah.
Well, until Dr. Kill comes in, Dr. Kip comes in. Wasn't it where the original?
What do you mean until Dr. Kip comes in?
Well, because I'm sure
in and out.
Yeah, he's the authority here. Wasn't the original Septuagint tradition just the first 5 books of Moses? And then when the other ones were translated into Greek, that's kind of no one really knows exactly when they were added and whatnot.
See, I don't know which like the order that they did it in, but I know that like they were doing like pieces at a time, right? Like I know that like the translation of like Daniel would that one actually that one was explicitly written after already the
that
process
was
begun, but but like I know that parts in like Isaiah were like translated at different times than other parts, right? But I'm not sure where that all how that all started.
But the event where the so-called 70 scholars that translated it into Greek, that whole miraculous weekend, that was specifically for the first 5. The reason why I mentioned that is because a lot of apologists sort of, they'll say, well, yeah, the Septuagint, was written so long ago and blah, blah, blah. But not all of the Old Testament, not all of the Hebrew Bible was translated that early.
Remember, kids, if anyone says that the Bible had 40 authors, they're an evangelical in denial of all scholarship and don't have a fucking clue what they're talking about. 40 is your keyword to just nothing they say has any value after that.
Yeah. So we've been joined by Dr. Kill, who I'm sure ran through a number of other names: Professor Death, Professor Rape, Professor Anthrax. No, I will be Dr. Kill.
This is actually the result of a happy typo in a chat on a video stream, because the L's are located very close to the P's. So it's if you type my name in to your phone, it might actually come up as Kill, which is fun. That's fun, right?
Scribal error.
So, I don't know. How you guys doing?
Good.
Happy to have you on.
Thanks. I'm not showing my face because I'm on my phone. I'm actually I'm ashamed of my own nakedness. What can I say? So this sounded interesting. Talking about what we know about the Septuagint, which is the proper pronunciation, by the way. I learned that when I was in Septuagint. I learned that when I was in English.
Proper pronunciation?
That
sounds
is, yes,
so wrong.
yes. I know, right? But it's because
that sounds like I said it.
It's because Americans mispronounce many things. Sorry to say. But anyways, so the Septuagint is, and we think of it as a single thing, right? Like as the Greek translation of even the Torah. But more probably, there were groups of people living in the diaspora whose Jewish communities, right? Who were the people living there were not as readily familiar with the Hebrew text, and so this just addressed a need. So I think most Septuagint scholars will say that this is in large part kind of a grassroots thing, developing Greek translations of Hebrew scriptures, which is part of why we've got quite a bit of variability in terms of the Greek text. The Septuagint that we know of as a single text is actually an eclectic text. So this has been drawn from a variety of different manuscripts on the basis of grading them in terms of how scholars think, or how closely scholars think they trace back to something that represents an earlier or a more original Greek translation. But in truth, we have among a number of the Greek manuscripts of the Hebrew scriptures that we have that are earlier, there's honestly there's like no consistency. So, and also our manuscript tradition is not especially strong either. We have a handful of Greek translations of the Hebrew scriptures that date to the 1st century CE. So like Roman Judea. And some of these
older
are
than any New Testament. Scraps.
Pardon me?
older than any New Testament scraps, for sure.
Oh yeah, absolutely. So, but there's not a lot, and they're pretty scrappy. They're pretty fragmentary. So maybe the most impressive ones we have come from a place called Nahal Hever, which date to the. I'm not even sure if they're early century. I think they might actually be early 2nd century. These were part of a collection of Jewish dissidents who were hiding out during the Second Jewish Revolt, which happened in 134, 135. And we have scraps of a manuscript that contained the Minor Prophets. And the amazing thing about this manuscript, as well as Greek translations of Hebrew scriptures that were found at Qumran in the Dead Sea Scrolls, is that the text in those manuscripts actually looks like it's closer to a more literal translation of the Hebrew text than a lot of what we have in our proper quote-unquote printed Septuagint. So it's fun.
Very interesting.
So I'll say one more thing about this too. When we talk about the Septuagint, we're also talking about a text type, which is different from a translation. Scholars have recognized that for a number of the books of the Septuagint that appear in the eclectic text, they're dramatically different from what survives in the Hebrew Masoretic text. And for a long time, scholars thought that the Septuagint translators just didn't know what the hell they were doing. We know quite a bit better now, because among the Dead Sea Scrolls, we've found Hebrew manuscripts which actually look a lot closer to these Greek translations. So when you're talking about the Septuagint as a text type, this is like a different version of a Hebrew text that was also circulating in and around Judea.
Very interesting. Very interesting. It's amazing.
That's your text line for the day.
No, I love it. I love it so much. It's just it's so impossible. I think of, my days as an evangelical and the whole idea that you had to take this as, as written as this. It's just impossible if you actually understand any of the processes involved. And it's really, but it's very interesting to me to look at trying to understand how these things evolved and how, we're looking back, trying to reconstruct these things, what was more original than the other and how was that affected by political things. And we can only speculate in some cases, going far enough back, there's not a lot of surviving text, but it's terribly intriguing to look at all the possibilities. And really,
so many.
I think the best thing we can do is just assume that humans are human and acted in those times with similar motivations, if not similar capacities, to what we do today. People are people.
Exactly. Yeah. Oh, I hate to burst your bubble, Lilith, but if you do get into Aaron's time machine and go back to the Library of Alexandria, they won't let you in. Sorry.
Oh,
I know I have tits, but in his hypothetical time machine, you might be invisible and just an observer.
Okay. All right. Well, then carry on.
So you can read over other people's shoulders.
I would 100% read over other people's shoulder. And hey, women were not always kept out. I've been drinking.
You could serve drinks at the Library of Alexandria, like all the women do at the Evangelical Theological Society meetings.
No. Peace is when
disgusting.
What is it? Catholics and Protestants in Ireland worship together. The Jews and the Muslims eat together, and the Baptists drink in each other's presence. The evangelical women are not allowed to serve alcohol publicly, just privately.
I think there are multiple novels that use time machines to kind of go back in time and save things from destruction. Like Our History says this thing was lost, and they went back and bring it back. They save it. So If you can
But
go back and
Aaron's-
save the stuff just before the fire, no one would have
Aaron
noticed.
hypothesized one where you could only watch. You couldn't touch anything, but you could only watch, which you don't actually necessarily have to even physically appear to be there.
It's like a virtual drone that,
Mhm.
that is imperceptible by the people in that time. It just
Okay.
sees.
Because that would affect them.
Yep.
If I showed up dressed like this with this hair, they would be like, "What the fuck?"
Yep.
So I think there are two things we could do right now. We could either continue the reading, or we
Why,
could power
why,
through-
why would you want to do that?
Well,
Of
Tom has
course.
I am hungry.
Yeah.
Or we
Why not continue to judges? I don't know.
or we can power through the two questions that we have, and then go back to the reading.
Okay, let's do the two comments first. Eric Wander says the record of Joseph's burial connects with Genesis 50, 24 through 6. 24 through 6? What? Okay, we're reading backwards. It puts the
26,
story
yeah.
of Joshua in a broader context, suggesting that his death relates to the story of the patriarch's promises.
That means 24 through 26, probably.
Yeah.
Because
Very
usually,
likely.
if it's the same first digit, they just drop that one usually.
Okay.
So it may or may not be that, or it might just be a typo. But it's just as death relates to the story of the patriarchs. Yeah, absolutely. But this is kind of like the difficulty in reconstructing this stuff. Like, which one came first, or are they both based from like another tradition? Like it is a very difficult question, and there are multiple possible answers. Like I do want to do kind of a study into Joseph, right? Because like throughout the reading, like we've noticed a couple places where it's like talking about the house of Joseph or the tribe of Joseph, and I want to kind of tie that back in with stuff on the Joseph story itself. At some
Do
point.
it.
So I really want to do a study on that, but I have to finish the stuff I'm doing now. There's so much, but I think it would be a really interesting dive.
Yeah,
I
Lawrence
will-
is
I will
experiencing
just say-
something that I frequently experience too, where you're trying to do so much that it's like back in the old dial-up days when you try to download 9 things at one time, and you wait 3 days to get anything. Yeah.
I will just say that according to a certain now disgraced Egyptologist, the embalming of Joseph in that story is proof that the Exodus really happened. Really did, guys.
Oh, wow.
Of course it did. It's all happening. Yep.
I mean, how could Israelites have ever known anything about Egypt? Right? Unless
And
the
how
Exodus.
could they have taken the bones of Joseph? Because it's not like bones can endure without embalming. The fuck?
Right.
Haven't we found like embalmed bodies in Israel as well? Like,
That's pretty cool.
I'm not sure we have.
And then
Or
Seth
maybe it wasn't
Schroeder.
Israel, maybe it was. Yeah.
Seth Schroeder says, how do they date the different sources of the Pentateuch?
Oh my God. Okay. Oh,
It seemed like such a simple question.
it's
You
not.
have 10 seconds, Lawrence. 10 seconds.
10 seconds. Look for historical cues. That's it. That's the whole thing. Look for little historical hints and tie that into history, and then
Mhm.
kind of that's one step. That's a tough question.
Yeah, comparative literature is probably
That's part of it. Yeah.
now.
Now, would this be one of those clues? I want to ask you guys for verse 26, that phrase, the Sefer
That we
Torah
haven't
Elohim.
read.
Is that, what is that referring to? Oh, are we not there yet?
We're not there yet. We're
Okay.
still on verse 8.
Let's
I'm
read.
waiting for all of you to finish talking about the
Verse
Septuagint.
8? I thought we were at 15.
Yes. Well, you read 15. I'm still at verse 8. We haven't finished.
Oh,
Let Tomer finish.
so Tomer's the one holding up the show.
Yes, exactly.
Everyone else, shut up. Tomer, please read your commentary.
Thank you very much. So on verse 8, the Amorites. Dozeman comments, the Amorites change in meaning over time. The identity of the Amorites also ranges widely in the book of Joshua. In verses 8 to 13, the eastern Amorites are likely the two kings of Sihon and Og, although they are not identified as such. The Western Amorites are part of the list of indigenous nations, found in 3:10, 9:1, 11:3, and 12:8. The further reference to the two Amorite kings in the Masoretic text is likely a textual corruption. The Septuagint numbers the kings as 12. The reference may originally have been directed to the Western Amorite kings in general or to the coalition of 5 Amorite kings. On verse 9, Balak son of Zippor, according to Numbers 22 to 24, Balak did not fight Israel. This is explicitly stated in Judges 11:25. Quote, "Are you any better than Balak son of Zippor, king of Moab? Did he start a quarrel with Israel or go to war with them?" End quote. Kimchi comments, "This is the war he did, that he sent Balaam to curse you, and he showed from his acts that if he could, he would have fought against you. As is written, perhaps I can thus defeat them," in Numbers 22:6. Scripture likened the thought to an act. End quote. Ahituv supports this reading, and Butler writes that fought, quote unquote, doesn't necessarily involve physical combat, but can mean opposition and political disagreement. Israel may have not gone into battle against Balaam or Jericho, but rather faced their opposition to the Israelites' plans to occupy the land. Septuagint has, "He set himself against Israel." Dozeman notes Van der Meer's opinion that this is an attempt by the translator, quote, "to accommodate the fact that Numbers 22 to 24 does not report a direct confrontation between Israel and Balak," end quote. On verse 10, Septuagint has a different reading of the verse, quote, "And the Lord your God would not destroy you, and he blessed you with a blessing and rescued you out of their hands and delivered them," end quote. Butler and Nelson see MT as original, and Butler comments, "Despite Hollenberg's and Holmes's textual error interpretation, we must see that a theological issue was raised by the later tradition. The verse is based on Deuteronomy 23:6, Old Testament 5, which in turn is based on the tradition of Numbers 22:24, especially 23:11, 27, and 24:10. Behind the Greek tradition is apparently an unwillingness even to use the term Shema, to hear or to obey, with God as subject and man as object. Similarly, the most natural reading of the Greek is that God is the subject of the blessing, not Balaam. The Vulgate and Peshitta explicitly use first persons. The addition of the final phrase represents the use of traditional language, perhaps even an alternative reading in the Greek tradition to the preceding phrase, or a dictography out of verse 8 or verse 11. On verse 11, "The citizens of Jericho fought against you." The Hebrew Bible reads, "Ba'alei Yericho," literally the owners of Jericho. The word Baal can also designate citizens, as in Judges 9:2 and 1 Samuel 23:11, and is rendered as such by early translations and Ahituv. Butler, Dozeman, and Nelson read lords or masters. Kimchi notes that Joshua does not attest to the residents of Jericho fighting against the Israelites. He proposed that some of Jericho's lords left Jericho to warn the Canaanite kings, and when the Israelites conquered Jericho, they worked together with the kings who gathered to fight against Israel. Nelson writes that this represents a different tradition than what is told in Joshua 6. Butler, however, writes that this shows how the same tradition is viewed and used from different perspectives in different contexts. On that same verse,
I think the traditional explanation is that the kings held holdings in Jericho. Like every king in the land, like had like some land in Jericho. It's like a very important city, and that therefore that's how they were there to fight all together, sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
Whatever.
Yeah, all the 7 nations were gathered there, as Rashi says. On that, I actually have a comment on this. On Amorites, Perizzites, and Canaanites, Rashi comments, all 7 nations are mentioned here because Jericho is on the border and was the bolt and lock of the land of Israel. Therefore, all these 7 nations were gathered there, represented by their elite soldiers. And please don't use the song. Zakovitch, however, writes that there is not much sense in placing the list here and designates it as an addition. Gersonides wrote that the lords of Jericho were the kings of the 7 nations. Similarly, Dozeman notes Romer's opinion that the list is an addition to clarify the identity of the Lord of Jericho. Peshitta, followed by Ahituv, add a conjugation between Jericho and the Amorites, separating between the two. On verse 12, I sent the hornet ahead of you. This refers to Exodus 23:28 and Deuteronomy 7:20. As noted in these chapters, this has been understood as actual hornets, skin diseases, a metaphor for attackers or invaders, or a metonymy for panic and frenzy. And finally, verses 14 to 15, Nelson comments.
Or one giant hornet.
Yes.
Who spits acid across
is that just
river because it can't pass it.
So isn't that just the same word that it's used like in Exodus 23, like a part of the plagues, but we don't read hornets there, do we?
Yes. I mean, you can read it as hornet because it's tzil'ah, which means hornet. But some can use it, but others use it as I've already stated. Actual hornets, skin diseases, metaphor for attackers, metonymy for panic and frenzy.
But because the word is singular, there is also, you could also read it as one hornet.
Yes.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, Isaac told us at one point about when they came to the Jordan River, there was a sort of a popular story about one giant hornet like spitting at the enemies on the other side of the river. It's because of the singular.
Yeah, I don't
it
know.
was sort of weird.
Yeah. I think Tom out brought the story out.
Yeah, I did.
Yeah. I don't.
Apologies.
No, Aaron. No, I have one final comment.
Finally,
I wanted to finish it, but Isaac just said you need to talk about the hornets. Okay, talk about the hornets. Okay. My final comment.
Finally,
I know I was referring to the last comment that I wanted to say. Aaron.
Sorry, I was feeling hornety.
Yeah, of course you did.
Tomer, we love you, and Aaron may wind you up a little bit because you're so adorable when you're very upset. It's sweet. It's all out of love. It's out of love, I swear.
Of course it is. Okay, my final comment, 14 to 15. Nelson comments, loyalty to Yahweh is a matter of intention and motivation, not just outer compliance. It is to be performed honestly, in Hebrew betamim, with undivided inner coherence, compare Psalms 15:2, and faithfully, in Hebrew be'emet, with dependable reliability in holding to agree upon decisions. This is consistent with the Deuteronomistic concern for sincerity. Compare verse 23 and Deuteronomy 6:5. The tradition that Israel worshipped Egyptian gods is not found in the Pentateuch, but is asserted in Ezekiel 27:23, 3, and 8. The demand to put aside other gods may echo a traditional ceremony of burying idols practiced at Shechem. Genesis 34 verses 1 to 4. Compare 35, 1 to 4. Compare this language in Judges 10:16 and 1 Samuel 7:4. The protagonist of first.
Sorry, is this like evangelical preachers in the South burning all your rock albums and your D&D manuals? Just traditionally as a ceremony.
Mm-hmm. Well, a lot of things were burned in history. So the protagonist...
they make a thing out of it.
Yeah. The protagonist of verse 15 suggests an opinion based on weighing costs and benefits. Genesis 28:8 and Exodus 21:8. That Joshua's house, quote-unquote, has already chosen Yahweh has been taken as one key to the historic kernel, quote-unquote, of this episode as the inauguration of the tribal system in an assembly at Shechem. It is more likely to be a rhetorical flourish. That's it for my commentary on this part. We have more.
All right.
Oh, finally, we see. There we go.
There he is.
Guest reader, maybe.
Dr. Kip, yes.
Proctologist.
Also, I need to ask Kip this before we definitely continue on with the chapter.
Or not.
It's gonna be quick. I promise.
Of course.
So he said something in chat about he said Lawrence and Joel Edmund Anderson. What was the context for that? I don't understand this.
Just going and getting your PhD in a couple of minutes.
Oh, okay.
Oh, can we do something with your volume?
I would have thought that was a Hoven. You would have Hoven did that, you know.
Yeah, Kip, you're blowing my doors, man.
All right, that was the question, though. Aaron, please read on.
Okay, it's just like I could hear everyone else like at the same level. But then Dr. Kill came on.
I understand.
Okay, so
Dr. Kill.
Yeah. All right. Now, therefore, revere the Lord and serve him in sincerity and faithfulness.
Wait. Where are you reading? Where are you reading from?
Oh,
Aaron?
you're right. That was 14. This was okay. Going to.
We're
16.
reading 16 now. Finish the chapter.
Fuck
please.
you. Okay.
You're welcome.
Then the people answered, "Far be it from us that we should forsake the Lord to serve other gods. For it is the Lord our God who brought us and our ancestors up from the land of Egypt, out of the house of slavery, and who did those great signs in our sight. He protected us along all the way that we went, and among all the peoples whom we had passed. And the Lord drove out before us all the peoples, the Amorites who lived in the land. Therefore, we will also serve the Lord, for he is our God, and obviously not the God of the Amorites. They were apparently created by a different God who cares for them, I guess, but not as much as our God cares for us and wants to kill everyone but us, because he's the God of all people. Anyway. Yeah. But Joshua said to the people, "You cannot serve the Lord, for he is holy. He is a holy God. He is a jealous God," which is inexplicable and contradictory. But he will not forgive your transgressions or your sins. If you forsake the Lord and serve foreign gods, then he will turn and do you harm and consume you after having done you good. And the people said to Joshua, "No, we will serve the Lord." Then Joshua said to his people, "You are witnesses against yourselves that you have chosen the Lord to serve him." And they said, we're witnesses." He said, "Then put away the foreign gods that are among you and incline your hearts to the Lord, the God of Israel." And the people said to Joshua, "The Lord our God we will serve, and him we will obey." So Joshua made a covenant with the people that day and made statutes and ordinance with them at Shechem. And Joshua wrote these words in the book of the law of the Lord, and he took a large stone and set it up there under an oak in the sanctuary of the Lord. And Joshua said to all the people, "See, this stone shall be a witness against us, for it has heard the words." This rock was listening to what we were saying. "It's heard the words of the Lord, and thus he spoke to us, and therefore it shall be a witness against you." Because this is a Jewish rock, believes in the Jewish religion.
I swear to God, I am
The
getting
rocks
the
are Muslims, what are you
icon of
talking
some
about?
goddess tattooed on my skin. So even in death, that fucker can't claim me.
Well, we all know from the Quran that the rocks are Muslims.
Yes, and they point out where the Jews are located. But then there's also that Christian passage that talks about how the rocks and stones themselves will start to sing. Yet, when I say that, no, rocks are not Christian or Jewish or Muslim, rocks are atheist, well, then everybody loses their mind.
I was wondering here if this stone here, if it's being used in any way idiomatic or figurative for the law of the scroll of God or whatever that's there. And I find that really interesting because I think in the New Testament, Jesus does something similar with Peter and on this stone. And I know the metaphor there it's a little different. But what is the interpretation?
I will tell you. I will tell you who thinks the stone is Jesus.
Is it Origin?
No, actually, it's not Origin. No, it's not P-Town. It is Cyprian of Carthage.
Oh my God!
Yeah, I find it interesting that it says that the tree is in the tabernacle.
Of course it is.
Like, I thought trees are not allowed in the tabernacle. Like, isn't that?
Well, no, we wouldn't want to accidentally start worshiping God's wife because they had a very bitter divorce, and he's still pissy about it. But
yeah, this is interesting.
I mean, either way, this is what it means by witness, right? It's not in the same way we mean by like witness in like a court or anything. So usually it's just like, to serve as a reminder or something that you can like actually read. So if they're like if some of these laws are like inscribed on this, then like, oh, this is your witness. This is the thing that will hold you accountable, I guess.
Okay.
As I pointed out like half an hour ago, if there's any redactor or any new source or anything, they always insert a scene where all of Israel has the law read to them again because reasons, and they all affirm their commitment so that you can, keep the generational idea of slavery to this fucking bastard of a god as, the right and due and proper manner of things.
Okay, so this rock will be a witness against you. Just imagine that. Do you, Granite, swear to testify? Therefore shall be witness to if you deal falsely with your God. So Joshua sent the people away to their inheritances. After these things, Joshua, son of Nun, the servant of the Lord, died, being 110 years old, and feeling cheated that he didn't get to have multiple hundreds of years on his lifetime like everybody before. They buried him in his own inheritance at Timnah Sarah, which is the hill country of Ephraim, north of Mount Gash.
Well, nice try, I guess.
And let's not forget that he didn't choose his inheritance, which is
Of course not. It
Israel
was chosen by the magic
We'll
rocks.
probably have a comment on that.
Did somebody want to say something about that before I continue?
No, please continue.
Israel served the Lord all the days of Joshua and all the days of the elders who outlived Joshua and had known all the work that the Lord did for Israel. The bones of Joseph, which the Israelites had brought up from Egypt, were buried at Shechem in the portion of the ground that Jacob had bought from the children of Hamor, the father of Shechem, for 100 pieces of money. Pieces of money.
Well, there is a specific word here. It's
What?
Ksita.
Okay.
Ksita, but we'll get to that.
I'm more
Yeah.
familiar with the phrase pieces of
Also,
silver,
it's
but
not-
it's
It's not
Yeah, it's-
Shechem, Shechem.
Shechem.
So, but
Oh,
that,
he tried. he
No,
tried.
actually, the Masoretic text also Shechem. So
Yeah,
Oh,
sure.
Yeah, either way,
Interesting,
okay.
100
Either
pieces of
way.
money. The value, weight of the unit is unknown, which is
Yeah.
yeah.
Just
Yeah,
try to
but
pay for something. Just try to pay for something in pieces of money.
well, I have
You know,
a comment on this as well. But
I'm a millionaire if I have pieces of money.
It's fun. It's fun. I just spent this last week writing about Genesis chapter 34 and that story about Shechem and Dinah and Hamor.
Oh,
by the way,
always good to add a little genocide to your fun after.
It's wild. It's wild.
which we've already covered, but I did.
Yeah, Dr. Kip. While I have
sorry.
you on here, I do really want to have that hangout that Lawrence was alluding to earlier.
Oh, about the Adam, and
And I'd like to have another hangout with you, just one-on-one on the history of Genesis.
yeah, sure.
Yeah.
That sounds fun. My mic's better now, right? Sorry,
Yeah.
I was.
Yeah.
Yes.
I've never done
you're
this
at the same-
before, but I was like trying to do all my audio through my earbuds while I was sitting in the sitting area, and at the exact same time when you told me that I was like way too loud, my wife was like, "Ah, it's so loud."
Yeah, well, it was fine until you started speaking and my ears started bleeding. Okay.
Oh, sorry. Wow, that's what
All
my
right,
kids.
so all right, so where was I now?
32.
That the rock will be a witness to us,
Sorry.
blah, 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 blah. After these
32?
things, 32, okay. The bones of Joseph, which the Israelites had brought up from Egypt, were buried at Shechem in the portion of the ground that Jacob had bought from the children of Hamor, the father of Shechem, for 100 pieces of money, because that's the part that we need to remember in God's timeless message to all mankind. It became an inheritance of the descendants of Joseph. Eleazar, son of Aaron, died, and they buried him at Gibeah, the town of his son Phineas, or Phinehas, which had
Pinchas.
been given him what?
Pinchas, but you'll never pronounce that.
Pinhas?
Pinchas. With
Pinhas?
Pinchasa.
Penis.
Pinhasa. Pinhasa.
No, never mind.
Look, I like Lawrence's pronunciation. Penis. Which had been given him in the hill country of Ephraim. Okay. And that chapter is done. Commentary,
or is
everyone.
It?
Or
Lawrence should probably stop reading Odes of Solomon.
Did you actually start reading through some of those?
Yeah.
Did you get to Ode of Solomon?
Inanna.
So that was we were speaking over each other.
Sorry.
Okay, did you get to Ode 19?
No, I didn't yet, actually.
Okay, that's the best
So
one.
I
Okay.
will. Okay.
It was
That's
little,
another
what were you asking?
I was saying I prefer the original based on Inanna, with the cream and her furrows and the fruit in the tree. And yeah, let's just say I prefer the older version. It's a little less creepy. Nobody's breasts haven't developed yet.
I don't want to know. Okay, so on verses 19 to 24, Dozeman comments, the change of motifs in verses 19 to 24 indicates an addition. It states that the people are not able to serve Yahweh. It also shifts the threat to Israel from the other gods, quote unquote, to the foreign gods, quote unquote. The three pledges of the people to serve Yahweh further demonstrate that verses 19 to 24 is an addition. The first pledge in verse 18 is part of the original account of the covenant ceremony. It occurs within the parallel structure of the review of history, verses 1 to 13, and of the covenant ceremony, verses 14 to 18. In this instance, the choice of the people to serve Yahweh completes the cycle. The second pledge, verse 21, is embedded in the addition, in which Joshua declares the people's inability to serve Yahweh, thus negating the previous pledge. The third pledge, in verse 24, concludes the addition. It functions as a resumptive repetition to mark the return to the original covenant ceremony, verses 25 to 27. The inevitable unfaithfulness of Israel to which they become legal witnesses disrupts the original commitment ceremony. The addition even negates the content of the original covenant ceremony. In the original ceremony, the choice of Israel, verse 15, has positive implications for serving Yahweh, verse 18. In the addition, the choice of Israel confirms their inability to serve Yahweh. The insertion is likely part of the larger nomistic Deuteronomistic revision of the book of Joshua, or a later edition within the same tradition, which also links the ceremony to the many instances of unfaithfulness in Judges. On verse 22, yes, we are witnesses, they replied. This is absent from the Septuagint. Butler writes that the sentence does not fit with the following syntax, where Joshua isn't mentioned as subject again. He writes that this sentence may be a literal insertion seeking to make clear the conscious confession and thus the basis for guilt of the people. On verse 25, decrees and laws, in Hebrew, chok v'mishpat. Rashi comments, he set in order for them there the statutes of the Torah, and they accepted them upon themselves, end quote. Dozeman notes that this term appears infrequently in late literature in the Bible with different meanings. For example, in Exodus 15:25, Numbers 27:11, 35:29, and 1 Samuel 30:25. He writes that in the context of Joshua, this term should be interpreted as the commitment of the tribes to serve Yahweh, and not as a replacement for or a reinterpretation of the Torah of Moses. On verse 26, the book of the law of God. The book of the law of God. In Hebrew, it's Sefer Torat Elohim. This term also appears in Nehemiah 8:8 and 18 8, 18, and 9:3. Verses 8 and 18. The book of the law, which is called the book of the law of Yahweh their God, and 2 Chronicles 17:9 and 34:14. The book of the law of Yahweh. Talmud Makot 11a records a dispute between Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Nehemiah in regard to what Joshua wrote. One said that this refers to the final 8 verses of the Torah, and the other to Joshua 20, which talks about cities of refuge. Zakovitch writes that in biblical Second Temple literature, this book refers to the Torah. Nelson writes that this phrase is, quote, a conspicuously non-Deuteronomistic phrase, end quote. Dozeman writes that this book does not refer to the Hexateuch nor to the Enneatukh, i.e. Genesis through Judges, nor even to the revelation at Mount Sinai. Rather, it is the, quote, details and the regulations of the covenant, end quote, ceremony in Joshua 24, according to Russell.
Yeah, so on that one, Alter notes that, yeah, it is a new designation, of course, modeled after the book of the Law of Moses, and so can refer either to Deuteronomy or to the 5 books of Moses, unless what Joshua writes is an appendix to them. So the issue here is it is a very interesting designation, right? So did they have this separate, what's the word I'm looking for? This separate nomenclature for like a different part of the book, maybe? Like it could be like specifically, a legal text that is somehow different than the book of the Law of Moses.
I mean, there is that tradition of the written versus the oral, which has been used to cover many, inconsistency, and it may have something to do with that.
And I'm not sure if it could be referring to just what he just kind of said or whatever he taught there at Shechem, because in verse 25, it sounds like whatever he taught there was added to that book or that scroll. So kind of saying that's an independent thing, and then what we just talked about has been written in there. Now it's a complete.
Yeah, so it looks like what is being added is some covenantal text.
Okay, I'll continue on a large stone. Butler comments, an ancient practice underlies verse 26. A great stone is set up under a tree within the sanctuary. G.E. Wright has tried to show that the excavations of Shechem have uncovered cultic areas featuring cultic or matzevot. E. Otto has called this explanation into question, again showing the necessity and difficulty of interpreting the hard facts, quote-unquote, of archaeology in relation to literary witnesses. Whatever the final archaeological interpretation proves to be, Joshua 24 attests to a period when stones were used with cultic significance by Israel. The legal literature of Israel roundly condemns such pillars, but this did not stop the practice. On the oak near the holy place of the Lord, Hebrew for oak is Allah. Rashi writes that this refers to the doorpost of the entrance, as seen in 1 Kings 6:31. He notes that some interpreted it as the oak tree where Jacob buried the idols in Genesis 35:4. Likewise, Ahituv and Zakovitch identified it with the oak tree from Genesis 35:4, with the latter writing that originally the vocalization was Ella, attested in the Septuagint, but was changed by the Masoretes to Allah to avoid contradiction with Genesis 35. Butler notes that the use of cultic trees is attested in earlier biblical passages, such as Genesis 13:8, 22:33, Judges 4:11, etc., but also came under condemnation, Deuteronomy 12:2, 2 Kings 16:4, and Isaiah 129, etc. He writes that this text shows a very early period in the history of Israelite religion when stones and trees were used unthinkingly and innocently in the cult, and became such a fixed part of the tradition that later writers did not remove them. Dozeman writes that there are indications that the sacred tree functioned in the religion of the Northern Kingdom, 2 Kings 13:5 and 23:15. The role of the stylized tree as a cultic symbol, or as a reference to the goddess Asherah, was diminished possibly as early as the late monarchic period, but the symbol of a stylized tree continued to play a role in post-exilic Samaria. He further writes, The motif of the terebinth in Joshua 24 reinforces the conclusion that the stylized tree continued to have an influence in post-exilic Samaria, at least in the literary tradition. The meaning of the terebinth undergoes significant reinterpretation. However, the book of Joshua is thoroughly monotheistic in outlook. The contrast in the ceremony at Shechem between the past polytheism of the ancestors and the worship of Yahweh alone, symbolized by the great stone, quote unquote, is meant to reinforce monotheism. The placement of the great stone under the terebinth to signify the ratification of the covenant transforms the meaning of the stylized tree from its original association with the goddess into a symbol of monotheism, in which allegiance is restricted to Yahweh, the God of Israel. On verse 27, this stone has heard all the word the Lord has said to us. Butler writes that here is an ancient understanding that attributes life, quote unquote, to cultic stone. Nelson writes that while it may sound like an archaic animism, it is probably just a literary metaphor. He further writes, commentators have suggested that what it is supposed to have heard are the unreported stipulations of a covenant or the statute and ordinance of verse 25. However, it is said to have heard Yahweh's words, and the only utterance of Yahweh in the text is the historical review in verses 3 to 13. Thus says Yahweh in verse 2. Thus, the stone is really a witness to Yahweh's deeds rather than to Israel's obligations or agreement. It is the Israelites themselves, rather than the stone, who perform the role of witness to their self-obligation in verse 22. This stone functions in a way similar to the Jordan stones in 4 verses 1 through 8, which also serve as testimony to Yahweh's deeds. Should Israel disown, quote unquote, their God, the stone as a reminder of Yahweh's saving deeds would accuse them.
So it's more of a reminder via a monument, the way that, Statue of Liberty is meant to remind Americans to, welcome immigrants. Ugh, that didn't work.
Now, on verse 29, 110. This is the same age when Joseph died, as seen in Genesis 50, verses 22 and 26, 10 years less than Moses. Zakovitch notes that there are no other people in the Bible who died at that age, and this intends to connect Joshua more to Joseph. Ahituv writes that 110 years was the ideal lifespan in Egypt.
Yeah, I feel like where did I go over that? Yeah, I think I went over that in the Joseph story stuff.
I think you did.
Quite possibly.
I recall that, yeah.
Wait, sorry, did you say 110?
110. 110.
I thought it was just to make him younger than Moses.
No, but there's also the thing about not living past 120, right?
Yeah, but specifically because Joseph and Joshua died in the same age, it's supposedly to connect between the two.
And then they also have the bones being brought over.
Yes. On verse 30, Timnat Serach. This place is mentioned in 1950. In Judges 2:9, it is called Timnat Cheres. The word Cheres can mean sun, as seen in Judges 14:18, Job 9:7, and BDB Dictionary. Rashi, therefore, writes that it is called Timnat Cheres because there was a figure of the sun upon Joshua's grave, in reference to the miracle of the sun standing still in Gib'on. He also writes that others say that it is called Timnat Serach because its fruit would rot, masrichin, because of their abundant richness. Very creative. Butler, Nelson, and Zakovitch wrote that the original name may have been Timnat Cheres, which was later transposed to avoid any associations with sun worship. On verse 31, the Septuagint places this verse before 29 to agree with the Judges 2:7, since verses 6 to 9 there are the same as verses 28 to 31 here. It adds after verse 30, quote, there they put with him into the tomb in which they buried him the flint knives with which he circumcised the sons of Israel in Galgala when he led them out of Egypt, as the Lord instructed them, and there they are until this very day, end quote. And Dozeman comments, the reference to Yeah. The reference completes a motif developed throughout the Septuagint version of the book of Joshua, linking the burial of Joshua with the Septuagint version of the story of circumcision, 5 verses 2 to 9, and the Septuagint addition to the Levitical cities, 24 verses 21:42. The knives are intended to idealize Joshua in the Septuagint. They signify his first ritual action in the land of Canaan and his acquisition of the city Timnat Serach, and they become a permanent relic when placed in his tomb at Mount Gash. Rofe argued that the motif of the knives in the Septuagint of 24:31 was the more original version of the ending of Joshua, and that the removal in the Masoretic text was an instance of late numismatic editing, when the religious relics became offensive to the editors of the Masoretic text. A distinct vorlage to the Septuagint is possible, especially if the allusion in the Damascus document, 5:1-5, represents a literary parallel to the Septuagint version of Joshua. Then Hertog reversed the literary relationship, arguing that the knives represent the concerns of the translator regarding the status of uncircumcised Jews in Alexandria, which prompted the emphasis on purification in the Septuagint version of the episode of circumcision. The Septuagint account of circumcision, 5 verses 2 to 9, as an act of purification, 5:3, that assimilates Alexandrian Jews into Egyptian culture, i.e., removes the disgrace of Egypt in 5:9, adds support to the reading of Den Hertog.
Tomer, I never thought I'd be possible to do this, but it's pronounced Den Hertog.
Ah, okay, thank you. He's Dutch. Okay.
Yes.
Do people need some clarification on what the Damascus document is?
All I know about it is like some raw text, and I think it's a halakhic one, right?
More or less, yes.
Okay.
So this is it's called the Damascus document. Well, it's a bit of a roundabout way. It was first discovered as part of the Cairo Geniza. So the complete manuscript that we have of it is medieval. What's the Geniza? It's like manuscripts from like the 5th to the 8th or 9th century, I think. So that's where it was first discovered, and it was first published as what was called like a Zadokite treatise, priestly treatise, and it is. It's a halakhic text, largely about how to observe Torah and rituals properly within this ascetic community. And then scholars got really excited about it because fragments from at least 5 or 6 individual manuscripts were found at Qumran, dating as far back as I think about 120 BCE. Bearing in mind, of course, that these are fragments, so we don't have a complete copy from that early, but it's largely thought that this was a community composition, and this is where it originated. And one of the other interesting things about the Damascus document is that there's an original composition, and then there's an appendix at the end of it. These are distinguished as Cairo Damascus, Cairo CD, Cairo for the Cairo Geniza, Damascus for the title that was originally given to this work. And these are divided between Cairo Damascus A and Cairo Damascus B, and Cairo Damascus B is it's basically like an amendment or a collection of amendments to various rules and stipulations that appear in Cairo Damascus A. So it's like we have an example of an evolving living text, I guess you could say. I'm done.
On verse 32, bones of Joseph, Butler writes that Joseph's bones represent the fulfillment of Genesis 50, and so joins Joshua with the first book of the Torah. Dozeman writes that the mention of the bones of Joseph reinforces the focus on the northern tribes of Joseph, suggesting its possible inclusion in the original ending of the book. On the 100 pieces of silver, the word translated to silver is ksita. This word is also mentioned in Genesis 33:19 and Job 42:11. Early translations render sheep or ewe lambs. And Rabbi Akiva in the Talmud Rosh Hashanah 26a claimed that in Africa, ksita referred to a coin, which I have no idea if that's true. Dozeman notes Romer's opinion that if the term refers to coins, then the time of composition is later than the 5th century. Ahituv, however, rejected reading it as a coin. He notes that according to Edward William Lane, kist is a name of a certain weight unit. He writes, however, that the connection between it and ksita is unclear.
I mean, coins were usually, they did usually have, they were weighted. So like so even though like it could mean, oh, here's a unit of weight, that would be synonymous with a certain amount of money.
Yeah, like a shekel is a coin representing a weight of silver.
Bible that reads 100, I don't know how to pronounce it, quesitas. It's a unit of money of which the value and or weight is unknown.
Right, yeah.
So Chalot says that there's an Arabic root that looks similar, kasata, to divide, measure, from which kisita means literally something measured. Kasat is a part or a portion or an installment. Somebody suggests it's the equivalent of 481 dirham or 1,429 grams. But it looks like it's literally just the root. It's derived from a root, meaning something like to measure or to weigh.
Mm-hmm.
Also, we have a more modern example of stuff like that. Pieces of 8. And 2 pieces of 8 is 1 doubloon.
So modern.
It is more modern than this.
Yeah.
Where's your
I'm a little
eye patch and
confused
your
about
carrot?
that. If you had 2 pieces of 8, would that be 1 piece of 4?
Aaron,
It's a doubloon.
Okay. On that same verse, the sons of Hamor, the father of Shechem. Ahituv comments, Hamor and Shechem are described in Genesis 34 as persons, but Shechem is the personality which represents the city of Shechem, and Hamor represents its residents, which allegedly came from Hamor, the ancient ancestor. Compare Judges 9:28, quote, the people of Hamor, father of Shechem, end quote. The choice of the name Hamor, which means donkey, as the name of the ancient ancestor of the people of Shechem, is related. Sorry, I blanked out. Sorry. It's related to the treaty-making ceremonies of ancient Semites. According to one document found at the Mari tablets on the Euphrates, dated 18th century BCE, killing a foal was practiced in treaty-making ceremonies. Compare the covenant of the pieces in Genesis 15:8 forward and Jeremiah 34 verses 18 to 19. Of course, there is a connection between the name of the god of Shechem, Baal Berit in Judges 9:4, or El Berit in verse 46, to Hamor, the ancient ancestor of the people of Shechem, end quote. Septuagint reads Amorites instead of the sons of Hamor. Butler writes that Septuagint adjusts to the more common designation of the inhabitants of the land, rather than to the specific context picked up from Genesis 33:19. It also adjusts father of Shechem to inhabitants of Shechem. And finally, on verse 33, Nelson comments, the disjunctive syntax of a subject-first sentence changes the topic again. Eleazar has played an important role in Joshua, seen in 14:1, 17:4, 19:51, and 21:1. So mention of his death and burial is appropriate. Perhaps this is related in some way to the priestly materials found elsewhere in the final form of the book. Whether this town or hill was given originally to Eleazar or to Phinehas is unclear, but its eventual ownership by Phinehas points to this new situation of the post-conquest era in which the land of promise is handed down by inheritance. The location of this Ephraimite Gibeah is unknown.
Every once in a while, I wonder how many people have been mercilessly and brutally slaughtered in arguments over syntax. See, Lawrence, I'm not wrong. I mean, how many things have been declared heresy because of an argument over syntax, and then all the blood?
Syntax can be part of it, but also translation issues, like especially with Jerome and how much he fucked up.
Yeah, I mean, we'll see the Vulgate a
Rivers
lot.
of blood because people can't agree on fucking grammar. Your grammar.
I mean, if you've been following the Kip and GE drama, not too far.
There will be blood.
Yeah, okay. Internet blood is different from real blood. There were people burned at actual stakes with actual fire and shit.
For elaboration.
Yes. Not engaged in.
No, for elaboration, Godless Engineer wants to teach me how to read Greek. I think that's a fair summary, right, Lawrence? Is that it?
Oh, wow.
not too far off.
Apparently, Michael Jones also wants to teach me how to read Greek.
Yeah, the people that don't know Greek.
Just
Michael Jones wanted me to learn Greek too.
Well, he should learn it first.
Yeah, well,
right?
It's just like there's a handful of people who are like, yeah, I'm fluent in Koine Greek, and you're right, and Michael Jones is wrong. I don't know how many Greek scholars do we have to amass here?
Yeah. Make a list. You need a list. It provides validity. Oh, hello, pretty baby.
So the thing about Greek is it's a very dynamic language. So there are many ways that you can translate the same sentence. And the thing is, you need context, but even though that context can also not be super clear. Like if it goes from some regular construction of here's your nominative, here's your verb, and here's your accusative. But what if you include in the next sentence like a genitive absolute? Is that going to be talking about the same thing? Who fucking knows? It could be, could not be. It's a very dynamic language, is how I put it.
So problematically though, and this holds for Michael Jones. This holds for Godless Engineer. People who don't understand how the languages work will often depend on some of this ambiguity that they really don't understand as a way to make dumb arguments about what's happening in the language. Because I mean, there are certainly things that we can say with some high measure of confidence regarding some of these things. For example, in Galatians chapter 1 verses 18 and 19, it's pretty unambiguous from a sensible approach to how the language works that James is the brother of Jesus. Full stop. It's pretty sensible. It's pretty obvious from a
which
sensible
James
approach.
And which Jesus.
So,
we'll get to that.
There's some debate around which James, but
sure, there is some debate around which James. So, but and for another example, more recent example, that there is, if you're going to read the text of Matthew 21 and his triumphal entry into Jerusalem from a proper syntactical view and in conversation, a source critical conversation with Mark, which is Matthew's source, then it really is unambiguous that Matthew has Jesus pictured sitting on two animals. Full stop. Like that's just the way the language works.
That's
and it's not unusual for Matthew to correct Luke or Mark in some of these narratives. Like there's a bunch of examples where he does the same thing and changes things around.
And when you follow it carefully, you can see how he's really deliberately doing this. Like it's not, he's being really cautious in his approach here.
Yeah,
So
I would
the
say
donkey and the cult, right? So like
yeah,
the because if I remember properly, the syntax is, it's for both of them is like accusative, kai, and accusative. So like the verb there applies to both of them, and that's how the language works.
I would say one of the things that got me out of evangelical thinking when I was even in high school, started to make the wedge, was chemistry and physics and the concept of significant figures. And this is something I've noticed, correct me if I'm wrong, but even if you do not have expertise in a specific subject, the way you can tell people who are not talking out of their ass is that they will say there's a high probability of this. I think there's a lower probability of that. They'll talk about things in shades of gray, in probabilities, in, degrees. And, they may think very high degree of something, but they're not going to use the same sort of absolutist language as a fucking evangelical will use for everything. People who actually carry some expertise are very aware of the limits of their knowledge and the limits of the knowledge of that particular field of study. And also, there's debate, and it's interesting and it's awesome. Nobody needs to hate debate. Debate is great. It's the lifeblood of scholarship. But at the same time, there's no, you're not damned to eternal torture if you think that this source came before that source or anything. It's not so extreme.
I was promised I would be damned.
But some of us can hate debating, right?
Fair enough.
Yeah,
That's a personal taste. You're entitled.
It's such a, like, to me, the idea of winning a conversation is so dumb. Like, it's like, just have a conversation. And
because you
I
care
know
about
the
truth more than pissing on people.
Right, yeah, the Greeks, they often called their trials agon, which means competition. So they did have this kind of nature to it, but that's also, you have to remember that's the birthplace of modern rhetoric. Yeah, of course they're gonna treat it that way, but it's toxic to me. I just don't want to engage.
No, it's very toxic. But I mean, it's an observation Sam Harris made too, that if you're listening to scientists, it's the furthest thing from arrogance. They're like, I'm sure someone knows this topic better than me, and as far as I understand, yada yada yada. All of these caveats, because people who know what they're talking about are aware of their ignorance and will make statements insofar as their knowledge can justify, but with reasonable justification, marginalization in there, room for discussion. The people who talk in absolutes are children and charlatans.
I get
and the
you.
latter have
and
no
I
excuse.
agree. I hate to argue, so I don't.
That's not true.
I do not believe you, Aaron. I love you with all my heart, and I do not believe a word you just said.
I think where it becomes really clear is, well, at least the way that I perceive it is, there's the difference between agenda-driven and evidence-driven scholarship. And we see that in just about every field that relates to this subject, whether that be biblical studies, archaeology, history. You're always going to have a percentage of folks that are very much agenda-driven. And then when you see that, you're like, okay, wait a minute. And then I guess with that, I can do a shameless plug since Dr. Kip is here. There's an episode that is premiering in 2-3 hours from now, where Dr. Kip does a very thorough and in-depth analysis of the research that came out as a result of the whole Mount Ebal alleged tablet inscription, where he goes into great depths into addressing every one of those areas where they might be just wrong, and they're looking at things not through evidence and consensus and what other experts are saying, but very much they're just after demonstrating that whether it be that the Bible, was divinely inspired, or in this case, they're trying to make it out to be where this Mount Ebal inscription is evidence against the documentary hypotheses and all kinds of other wild claims. So I do want to invite you guys to check us out. Positive Mind. Again, Dr. Kip was very generous to do that for us, and so
that sounds
check us out.
wonderful.
How long is that video, Mark?
The first one, it's just short of 2 hours. Yeah, we went. I had to break it up into 2 parts because we went over 4 hours.
If you have ADHD or whatever, just play your favorite video game, play Baldur's Gate 3, play The Witcher, play whatever you want, and listen to it on the audio. The processing is better, and you get to progress in your game. So, just saying.
There are a few visuals in it, though.
Okay, well, glance down. Keep it on your phone and pause and glance down. It's awesome. I love this. I love this so much. It just warms the cockles of my cold black atheist heart to hear all the information and knowledge and debate. It's just, I love it.
I also want to point out the weird mentality that some people have, that it's either the documentary hypothesis or Mosaic authorship. Those are not the only 2 options, guys.
Oh my God, no! Even I, who came into this with pretty much just the fucking documentary hypothesis, said it's the bones. It's the beginning of a sketch of the framework. It's not absolute. Oh my fucking God. Mosaic authorship is not a thing. That's nobody. Nobody
the word
supports that.
hypothesis kind of implies this is one option. This is the one that we suspect for these reasons.
So this is where I prefer to
theory, but yeah. Sorry, go ahead.
This is where I prefer just to talk about source theories, because that's where there is pretty very, very strong scholarly agreement about this, is that the Torah, the Pentateuch, was cobbled together, stitched together from sources. The differences between scholars have to do with how you're organizing those sources, where you see the differences between the sources, what the sources are, where they came from. And those are big disagreements. Don't get me wrong. There's lots and lots
version of them
debate
allows
about
for
that.
Mosaic authorship.
Not one.
No, not. Like I've said, the documentary hypothesis, it was a huge step forward. It's historically in the field. It's very big that step was taken. But oh my God, the details. Oh my God, so many options. Yeah. Mosaic authorship is not a thing.
And it's funny because so much of where scholarship is moving is not it's not moving in the direction closer, even temporally speaking. We're not moving closer to an ancient early Iron Age text. If anything, it's getting further and further away from that. There's much more conversation and scholarship now about things like Hellenistic influence on the Torah. Not that we're not going to go we're not going to go crazy like Russell Gmerkin, but we're also we need to be fully aware of what's happening in here. I'll just say this, I threw this comment in there earlier about the Samaritan Pentateuch, or the Samaritan origins of the Pentateuch. And this is kind of what I'm getting at, is a very good book that I would recommend people to read is The Origins of Judaism by Jonathan Adler. Came out, is it 2 years ago now? It's a Yale, I think it's a Yale resource series book, where he basically tracks the archaeology and in an effort to answer the question of when Judaism became normative for most Jews, And he tracks it on the basis of things like the observation of the Sabbath, dietary laws, and importantly, when most Jews were reading the Torah. And the results are surprising. And part of that has to do with something else that scholars are recognizing, is that when you get back to this from and from my perspective, like I approach this from mostly a manuscript perspective. From a manuscript perspective, if you're tracking the literature, you kind of hit this point of where you've run out of data, and that point happens to be 300 350 BCE. And what we see happening is, at this point in time, is this emergence of these, the beginning of the emergence of these three or four groups, Jewish groups, forms of Judaism. You've got the emergence of what we would call, for lack of a better term, like a Sadducite or a Sadducean form of Judaism. You've got the Pharisees coming on a little bit later. You've got the Samaritans. All of this stuff happening kind of around the same time, give or take. And another thing that you see are individual text types starting to grow with these communities. So one of the ideas that I'm toying with a lot more recently, and this came out of listening to LeYisra'el Feldman, who wrote a really neat book called The Consuming Fire, which is her reconstruction and translation of the priestly document, just the priestly document. But she had a discussion on my friend Dan McClellan's podcast, Data Over Dogma, number of months back, where they asked this question about the invention of this fivefold division of books that we recognize as the Torah, the Pentateuch. And she was like, when you look at, and this is what I'm seeing, and this is a lot of the kind of work that I'm doing, is when you look at our earliest manuscripts, which are the Dead Sea Scrolls, what you see are a scant number of fragments where you can see, like, an individual scroll might have one or two books of the Torah written on it. What we don't see, or what we certainly can't know for certain, is like complete Torahs, right? Like all five all together. What we also see is a text that scholars have identified as the reworked Pentateuch, which is very close to the Samaritan version of the Hebrew Bible, known as the Samaritan Pentateuch. But interestingly, that's the only version that seems to contain like the whole thing. So I'm actually starting to play around with this idea that this fivefold division of text, this idea of a Torah comprised of Genesis through Deuteronomy, might be a Samaritan text from which these other Jewish groups, or to which these other Jewish groups are responding. And at that point, you're talking, 2nd century BCE.
Could that have something to do with how at some point historically a decision was made by some that there ought to be only one temple and it better be built in Jerusalem?
Oh boy.
And then we're just going to keep the first 5 books, because then beyond that, then it's no longer that you will worship me at the place that I will later define, but more so like it better be in Jerusalem.
So you bring in another really important point that I didn't even talk about, which is temples, right? There's a temple in Jerusalem. There's a temple in Samaria that the Hasmoneans destroyed. There's a temple in Leontopolis back in the 2nd century, which was in operation for like 100 years. These are temples of Yahweh. You look at what's going on in Elephantine, which was a Jewish community living in the Nile Delta way back in like the 4th century BCE, so the Persian period, and they had all sorts of really interesting thoughts and ideas about how to worship Yahweh. So I mean, Mark's right on point here. We're just kind of scratching the surface about what we think we know regarding, even just the shape of Yahwism as it's developing into Jewish religion at this point in time. And
It's clearly splintered quite a bit throughout history, but I have
Yes.
to say I love the idea, and it does make a lot of sense to me, that the Samaritans, who were completely shunned by their post-exilic brethren as being corrupted by the existence of the locals and their gods and whatnot, actually had the most accurate extant version of the worship of
or
Yahweh
maybe the
as it originally
earliest
was.
version or the first version. Kind of like they're the first ones who started putting these pieces together.
The least corrupted version of that real worship as it existed prior to all of these later influences, and that they were in a sense then shunned because they had that. It's I had a mentor once who talked to me about the the tale of the emperor who has no clothes, and the little boy who, and everybody pretends to go along until the little child says, "Oh, why does the emperor have no clothes?" And she's like, they never include the last line, which was, "And then they killed him," the little boy, because he spoke the truth. Because I feel like that has been the destiny of the Samaritans, to have the most original and authentic version of this cult, and then to be condemned for it and pushed out in favor of more expedient narratives. And it's very human, and it's very kind of depressing.
We got one more comment here to read. A historical philosopher says, I read somewhere that Yahweh was originally a southern Semitic metalworking god that was adopted by the Israelites somewhere after the Hyksos were expelled from Egypt. Thoughts?
So that, I believe, is the Midianite hypothesis, but kind of, right?
I don't think it was a metalworking god, though.
Yeah.
I've never heard metalworking.
I heard that claim once, but it was from like some pop scholarly, like some pop history article or whatever. But the but the idea, I feel like there might be some truth to that. That Yahweh came from the southern region.
But I think Southern Semitic is way too far. It's not Southern Semitic would be like Yemen and Ethiopia.
I've definitely heard. Not that far south. I've definitely.
But either way, he was a war and storm god initially.
Yeah.
That much we can tell.
Mm-hmm, definitely. And is somewhat of an import from the south, although not the south, if that makes sense.
Yeah. South of the land of Israel.
Tracking it geographically is,
but not southern.
Tracking it geographically.
Yeah.
More. I think that like it's the Midianite hypothesis. Midian is like it's like Edom, right? It's like that far south. It's northern Sinai, really.
Yeah.
But
that makes sense.
But the tracking geographically is interesting because it sort of looks like it goes from there north to Shechem, which was ancient Samaria, and then maybe at the point when Samaria was destroyed by the Assyrians in 722 is when lots of this stuff made its way south to Jerusalem.
All right, so were we done with this one?
Yes, we are. We are done.
All right,
finally.
Okay. All right, so we are going to be moving on next week, and thank you, Dr. Kip, for taking my friendly taunting and coming on board, because sincerely do appreciate having you here.
Yeah, no problem. That was fun.
Yeah.
Oh,
all right.
Happy Purim, Tomer.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Guys, you know how we know that the Qumranites were joyless assholes
because they didn't have the Book of Esther.
Yeah, they did not celebrate Purim.
Yeah. Boo on everyone who doesn't celebrate Purim.
Yeah. Purim is the epitome. Purim is the epitome of the saying, Jewish saying of like, they try to kill us, they failed, let's eat.
Or
Let's
drink.
eat and get drunk.
Yeah.
Okay.
Unless you're in a scene.
It's like, yeah, this one guy tried to kill us, he didn't even kill us, and we still like every time we mention his name, we're like, boo.
Ratchet,
Like,
ratchet.
We're gonna eat biscuits
Yeah.
that look like
We're
his
going to do
ears.
that when we read Esther. We're going to use ratchets. Don't worry.
All right. So we will be meeting next week to talk about what is it? Joshua 24?
No, actually, we finished Joshua 24. We're moving. Judges.
We're into Judges.
One of my favorite books of the Bible.
Yes, I would say that when I started commentating on this, I was like instantly hooked.
Yeah,
this is probably
I need
so far
so
my favorite
much weed.
book.
So much weed.
I've listened to Lawrence blow this up for so long that I'm so excited to hear his and Tomer's commentary on this chapter, on this upcoming chapter.
I love Judges. It's so good.
Yeah, it is fun. It's a very fun book.
It has a lot of the good stories. Your Samson.
Oh, wait. Oh my gosh, important thing. Yes, I cannot be here a week from today. I will be at American Atheist National Convention in Philadelphia.
Oh, can we do it on like Wednesday, Thursday, Tuesday then?
You want to do Tuesday?
Yeah, I mean I'm my semester is done, so I have no problem.
All right,
doing
Lawrence, Mark,
it's possible.
Tuesday works for me.
Yeah, I could do that.
Kip,
do Americans have bank
I don't-
holidays
I
for
don't
Easter?
know.
Is that a thing?
all right. Well, do it.
Like after the weekend, Tuesday,
Yeah.
kind of thing.
Yep. No, before the weekend, Tuesday.
Maybe.
Oh, before.
Well, that would be this coming Tuesday, wouldn't it? Because we're
Yes.
in the weekend.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I don't know. Maybe.
Okay.
Yeah, I'd have to look at my calendar.
I can't believe that I forgot that important detail. Yeah, I won't be here next week.
Very important.
Good for mentioning it.
Really.
We
How
can do
dare you
both
have a life.
Tuesdays.
Yep. Isaac wants to do both Tuesdays.
I'm fine with that. I mean,
No, Thomas said that he's already broken up. So
broken
Okay.
up. What do you mean by that? I mean that my semester is done. Like,
yeah. So
I'm free up for April. Yeah.
Yeah, so you've already broken up for the break.
Yeah.
It's like maybe that's a British thing. Yeah, we say.
Maybe.
Yeah, breakup is like the last day of school sort of thing.
Ah, okay. I see.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Well, I'm going to let everybody go then. Yes, I will set a show for Tuesday. Excited to do it on Tuesday. Thank you much, everybody, and welcome back.
Bye-bye.
Good night.
Bye, everybody.